There is something almost magical about the way a great television show hides things from you. Not hides them in a mean way, not hidden to confuse or frustrate, but hidden the way a good friend might tuck a little gift somewhere in your coat pocket before you head out into the cold. You find it later, when you least expect it, and the whole world feels slightly warmer for a moment. That is exactly what Family Guy has been doing for over 25 years. In every single frame, behind every single joke, underneath every single background gag and throwaway line and blink and you miss it detail, there are layers and layers of things that most people never see. Easter eggs buried so deep that entire communities of dedicated fans have spent decades trying to dig them all up. And even now, after all this time, new discoveries are still being made. This is a journey through those discoveries. All of them, the obvious ones that you probably already know about, and the deeply obscure ones that most people who have watched the show hundreds of times have never noticed. We are going to move through seasons, through episodes, through individual frames, and we are going to find every single thing worth finding. So, wherever you are right now, whatever hour of the night it is, whatever is sitting quietly on your bedside table, get comfortable. Let the lights go low. Let the world outside go quiet. Because what we are about to do is walk very slowly, very carefully, and very peacefully through one of the richest hidden worlds in animated television history. Let us begin at the very beginning. Family Guy premiered on the 31st of January 1999, right after Super Bowl 33. That first episode pulled in roughly 22 million viewers, an extraordinary number for a brand new animated show, inflated somewhat by the post-game time slot but still a remarkable debut. The episode was called Death Has a Shadow, and if you watch it today knowing what the show eventually became, it plays almost like a transmission from a parallel universe. The characters look subtly different. The animation has a looser, slightly rougher quality that would be polished out of existence within a few seasons. Peter's personality carries a warmth that would gradually cool as the decades wore on. But for all of its differences from what Family Guy became, that first episode also contains some of the earliest hidden details that fans have spent years unpacking. The most foundational Easter egg in the entire series is not in any single episode. It lives in the opening theme, and it has been sitting right there in front of everyone since the very first broadcast. When Lois sits down at the piano and the familiar melody begins, the sheet music propped up on the piano stand is not decorative. It is not generic. If you pause the frame and look closely, the sheet music displayed above her hands is the actual sheet music for the Family Guy theme song itself. The song she is playing in the opening is exactly the song you are hearing. The creators embedded this tiny piece of self-reference directly into the most watched 10 seconds of the entire show. And for years, most people had absolutely no idea it was there. Now, the opening theme has other secrets too, ones that took longer to find. In the very earliest episodes of the series, when the resolution of televisions was still quite low and the streaming age was still years away, the family photographs hanging on the wall in the background during the theme sequence were too blurry and indistinct to make out clearly. They were drawn as vague rectangular shapes, suggesting picture frames, without any real effort to render the faces inside them. But as the series continued and animation quality improved along with screen resolution, those background photographs became increasingly detailed. Eventually, fans zooming in on high-definition streaming versions of older episodes discovered that those blurry rectangles had quietly been updated to show actual recognizable portraits of Stewie, Meg, and Chris. The animators had reached back and filled in details they had originally left blank, rewarding anyone patient enough to look. The opening credit sequence itself borrowed something from another show, though the Family Guy team has never been especially eager to discuss it. Mike Reiss, a writer and producer who worked extensively on The Simpsons, pointed out in an interview that the theatrical production number format of the Family Guy opening, with curtains parting and an elaborate song and dance routine playing out, is strikingly similar to a couch gag from The Simpsons Season 4 episode Lisa's First Word. In that Simpsons episode, the usual brief living room gag expands into a full Las Vegas-style extravaganza with elephants, fire breathers, and chorus lines. Family Guy's opening has always had that same theatrical energy. Whether this was deliberate homage, unconscious borrowing, or simple coincidence has never been definitively settled, but it is one of the more interesting pieces of context to hold in mind while watching those familiar curtains pull back and the Griffin family launch into their musical number. Seth MacFarlane created Family Guy while still in his 20s, drawing heavily on two short films he had made during and just after his time at the Rhode Island School of Design. The first of these was a film called The Life of Larry, and the second was a follow-up called Larry and Steve. If you have never seen these films, they are worth seeking out, because they are essentially the prototype for everything that Family Guy became. Larry is an overweight, not particularly intelligent, middle-aged man. Steve is his talking dog. If those descriptions remind you of a certain father and his dog dynamic from a certain animated series, that is because Peter Griffin and Brian Griffin grew directly from these two characters. Their voices and relationship almost fully formed before the show ever existed. MacFarlane has been very open about this lineage, and in interviews he has mentioned that many of the jokes from those original student films were later adapted and reused in Family Guy episodes. He was, as he put it himself in one NPR interview, stealing from himself at great length. What makes this piece of history into a hidden detail is that when you watch certain early Family Guy episodes and Peter and Brian share a scene, you are not just watching two cartoon characters interact. You are watching the final evolution of a creative relationship that MacFarlane had been developing for years before the show existed. The way Brian tilts his head, the specific cadence of his dry responses to Peter's chaos, the sense of two people who are genuinely bonded even when they are annoying each other, all of that was tested and refined through those short films long before Fox ever saw a single frame. The friendship you are watching on screen has more history behind it than most people realize. The pilot episode of Family Guy, the version that was animated before the show was officially ordered to series, differs from the first broadcast episode in several small but fascinating ways. Seth MacFarlane himself spent roughly 6 months animating the original pitch, working out of his home with a budget of approximately $1 million provided by Fox. In this original version, the character designs are slightly different. Peter is wearing dark pants instead of his signature khaki green ones. Lois has noticeably blonder hair. Meg's clothing is blue rather than the pink and white combination she would settle into. Chris is in shorts. And perhaps most intriguingly, Seth MacFarlane himself voiced Chris in this early version, before Seth Green was brought in to take over the role. Hearing MacFarlane's voice coming out of Chris Griffin, even in these rough early recordings, is a genuinely uncanny experience for anyone who grew up with the show. There is also the matter of a very specific hidden reference that lives in the Season 2 episode called If I'm Dying, I'm Lying. In this episode, Peter manipulates a television executive into believing that his son Stewie has been healed by a miracle, all so he can convince the network to bring back a canceled show called Gumball 2 Gumball. The show is presented as a fictional piece of programming that Peter loves dearly, but Gumball 2 Gumball is also something else entirely. It is the name of the very first original project that Seth MacFarlane pitched to Fox before Family Guy was ever conceived. The pitch did not go anywhere, but MacFarlane remembered it, and he tucked it into an episode as a private joke that most viewers sailed right past without any idea of the significance. If you know the history, that moment lands completely differently. Peter is mourning the loss of Seth MacFarlane's own abandoned television concept, and the whole scene takes on an extra layer of melancholy that was probably entirely intentional. These very early seasons are full of little things like this, small, quiet acknowledgments of where the show came from and what it cost to get there. In the first season episode Chitty Chitty Death Bang, Stewie celebrates his first birthday. The implication of this, if you follow it through to its logical conclusion, is that Stewie was born slightly before the events of the series began. But in later seasons, many different episodes establish Stewie's birthday on different dates and in different contexts, making the exact timeline of his life one of the most debated pieces of continuity in the entire show's history. This is not accidental. The writers were aware that Stewie's age and his capabilities posed inherent logical problems for the narrative, and they eventually leaned into the inconsistency as a running joke rather than trying to resolve it. One episode even has Peter address unexplained continuity by attributing it to a wizard doing things, which is a direct reference to a phrase that The Simpsons fandom has long used to wave away their own show's internal contradictions. The second season episode Da Boom deserves special attention because it contains the origin point of one of the most famous running jokes in the entire history of the series. In this episode, set during the chaos of Y2K, Peter encounters a giant anthropomorphic chicken and engages in an explosive, city block-destroying fight sequence that lasts several minutes and completely derails the plot before Peter walks away. Covered in damage and the episode picks up exactly where it left off. This fight between Peter Griffin and Ernie the Giant Chicken would become one of the defining recurring elements of the show. But what most people do not know is the exact cause of the original altercation. The fight began because the chicken gave Peter an expired coupon. That is the entire reason. A coupon that had passed its redemption date. And from that absurdly small, absurdly domestic starting point, a feud was born that would span decades of episodes, cross international borders, infiltrate a Star Wars parody, and eventually claim the life of one of its participants. In a later episode called Meet the Quagmires, where Peter time travels back to the 1990s and inadvertently alters the timeline, there is a brief scene where Peter accidentally punches Ernie at a dance before their canonical first meeting. This creates a small but interesting continuity question about which version of events is actually the beginning of their feud, and dedicated fans have spent considerable energy debating whether the time travel episode retroactively changes the chicken fight origin story, or whether it exists as a separate thread that simply crosses the main timeline without replacing it. There is probably no clean answer, but the fact that this question even exists says something about the richness of the hidden world the show was quietly constructing beneath its most famous gags. The Griffin House itself, located at 31 Spooner Street, is a source of more hidden details than almost any other single element of the show. The exterior of the house is characterized by yellow clapboard siding, a teal roof, and a red front door, a color combination that feels very specific and very Rhode Island in its sensibility. The buildings that appear in the background behind the Griffin House in outdoor shots are based on real buildings in downtown Providence, Rhode Island, the city where Seth MacFarlane attended school. These are not generic cartoon buildings. They are slightly simplified versions of actual architecture that exists in the real world, and if you have ever walked through Providence with a Family Guy episode playing in your mind, the resemblances are immediately striking. But the interior of the house is where the real hidden details live. The living room, which functions as the central staging area for perhaps a third of all the scenes in the show's entire run, has undergone subtle changes over the years that most casual viewers have never consciously registered. In the earliest episodes, the living room floor is noticeably yellow. By the time the show settled into its post-revival style, the floor had shifted to green. The circular carpet that sits between the couch and the television changes color depending on the episode, sometimes appearing in cool tones and sometimes in warm ones, with no consistent logic to explain the variance. The couch itself, that familiar dark green piece of furniture that has held Peter's considerable weight through more than 2 decades of plot, remained largely consistent. But the decorative elements around it shifted quietly across seasons in ways that reward freeze-frame inspection on streaming services that did not exist when most of these episodes originally aired. Behind the couch in the living room, 2 landscape paintings of a mountain appear periodically. For years, these paintings were simply background elements, generic art standing in for the kind of slightly aspirational decoration that a working-class American family might pick up from a discount store. But in a Season 18 episode called Catfight, Stewie identifies the mountain in those paintings as Mount Quahog. The implication is that these are local paintings, representing a real landmark in the Griffin family's world, and that whoever hung them in the living room had a connection to that place significant enough to display it prominently in their home. A tiny detail that went unexplained for 17 years, resolved in a single throwaway line. And before we go any further, a small pause. Right now, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, wherever you are watching this, drop a comment below and tell me. Tell me your location and the time, whether it is 2 in the afternoon on a rainy Tuesday or 3 in the morning with headphones in and the rest of the house asleep. I always read every single one, and there is something genuinely wonderful about knowing where in the world this is landing. And if you have not subscribed yet, please take 1 second and do that now. It costs nothing, it helps everything, and it means you will be here for every single one of these hidden details we have not even gotten to yet. Section 2. The sheet music and the Sunday morning hidden details in seasons 1 through 3. The earliest seasons of Family Guy exist in a very specific creative headspace. Seth MacFarlane was young, deeply involved in every aspect of production, and operating with the focused ambition of someone who had something to prove. The humor was sharper, the characters were more internally consistent, and the writing room was populated with people who shared a specific vision of what the show was supposed to be. All of that manifested in episodes that were more carefully constructed than most people realized at the time, Episodes packed with details that rewarded the kind of close attention that would become much easier to give once streaming services allowed viewers to pause, rewind, and zoom in. Season 1, Episode 3, titled Chitty Chitty Death Bang, is one of the first episodes where the show demonstrated a genuine commitment to hiding jokes in the background. This is the episode centered on Stewie's first birthday, and it works on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, it is a story about a cult trying to bring Stewie to their leader, apparently based on a prophecy about the child of great evil. Stewie, for his part, is far more concerned with plotting how to get rid of the birthday clown he finds deeply irritating. But woven through this fairly straightforward comedic plot are tiny visual details that most viewers absorbed without consciously registering. One of the most frequently cited early examples from this episode involves the way the animators handled Stewie's room in this period versus how it would be handled later. In the very early episodes, Stewie's nursery has a quality of being slightly more connected to the domestic logic of the rest of the house. His crib, his toys, his various infant accessories all exist within the frame in a way that suggests a real child's room. But even in these early episodes, careful viewers could see that the room contained elements that did not quite belong in a standard nursery. The presence of blueprints and schematics partially visible in the background, tucked behind the changing table or folded beneath the toy chest, were easy to dismiss as background dressing. They were not background dressing. They were the beginnings of the hidden laboratory that would become a defining element of Stewie's character as the show continued. The animators were already establishing the secret architecture of his dual life before the plot ever formally addressed it. The Season 1 episode I Never Met the Dead Man contains a small detail that most people would never pick up without a hint. When Peter loses his driver's license and the family is forced to confront life without a car, there is a brief background gag involving a television broadcast that flickers past in one of the home scenes. The text visible on the screen during this brief moment is actual production crew information, credited writers and directors rendered as faux broadcast graphics. It is the kind of thing that would have been completely impossible to read during a standard television broadcast in 1999. But people watching the DVD releases and later streaming versions of these episodes discovered that the names were real, that actual writers from the show were embedded in the background of a scene that supposedly had nothing to do with them. It is the television equivalent of a painter hiding their own face in a crowd scene. The Wasted Talent episode from Season 2 is a remarkable showcase for the kind of layered detail the show was capable of in these early years. This is the episode where Peter discovers he has an extraordinary talent for playing piano while drunk, and where his obsession with winning prizes inside Pawtucket Patriot ale cans leads the family toward a genuine Willy Wonka-style parody. But the episode contains a musical detail so specific that it borders on genuine scholarship. When Peter takes the stage in a drunken state and begins playing piano, the songs he runs through are not random. Each one is a recognizable theme from a specific television show or film. He cycles through the themes from Dallas, from 9 to 5, from The Incredible Hulk, from The X-Files, and from The Mary Tyler Moore Show. And the payoff for that last one is that Mary Richards herself, the fictional character from that show played by Mary Tyler Moore, appears in the crowd and responds to her theme song exactly as she would in the opening credits of her own series, throwing her hat in the air. The joke is perfectly constructed on its own terms, but the deeper Easter egg is in the specificity of the musical choices. The songs are not just random memorable tunes. They are a very particular collection of songs from a very particular period of American television history, all of them representing shows that were considered either culturally significant or nostalgically beloved by a specific generation. McFarlane, who was a Rhode Island School of Design student with a deep interest in pop culture history, was essentially creating a small musical catalog of American television's middle period, dropping it into the background of a drunk piano scene, and hoping that the right people would notice. Most people laughed at the Mary Richards joke. A smaller number of people noticed that the Mary Richards joke was specifically the last stop on a very intentional tour. There is another musical Easter egg in this same episode that almost nobody catches in real time. The melody that plays during one of the transitional sequences between scenes borrows its harmonic structure from a piece of music that is not associated with Family Guy at all. It shares enough notes with a recognizable theme from another Fox program of the same era that people who were paying close attention to the score, rather than the animation, would have registered it as a gentle, fleeting acknowledgement of a network-sibling relationship. This kind of musical embedding was not unusual for the show's composer Ron Jones during the early seasons. Jones, who was deeply trained in classical composition and had worked extensively in film and television, approached even throwaway transitional cues as opportunities to embed jokes and references that most viewers would never consciously register, but that would still land somewhere in the subconscious. Season 1's episode, Death Has a Shadow, the very first episode, contains the earliest example of the show embedding real-world autobiographical content into its fictional narrative. In the episode, Peter gets fired from his job at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory after falling asleep on the assembly line and allowing a production run of toys to go out with missing or replaced safety components. The specific toys that are mentioned during this sequence are detailed enough that production designers clearly gave considerable thought to what kinds of products a working-class toy factory in Rhode Island might plausibly be manufacturing. But the hidden layer is in the broader setup. Peter being dismissed from a job he did not take seriously at an institution that did not appreciate him, and then discovering that he could navigate the world more successfully on his own terms, mirrors in a very loose but still recognizable way the early career experience of Seth MacFarlane himself, who worked at Hanna-Barbera on shows like Johnny Bravo and Dexter's Laboratory before leaving to develop his own projects independently. Peter's trajectory in that first episode is a very gentle, very coded autobiography of someone who left a big established institution to do something new, and the ending where everything works out better than expected might be read as MacFarlane's own hopeful projection onto his pilot episode's narrative. Season 2's Road to Rhode Island, which featured the first extended Brian and Stewie road trip adventure and set the template for an entire subgenre of episodes that would become some of the most beloved in the show's history, hides one of the most carefully observed pieces of character building in the entire early run of the series. During the episode, Brian and Stewie end up in a field in Texas after a sequence of travel disasters. They find a barn, they find a car, and during the time they spend together navigating this unexpected adventure, you can see, in small moments of genuine interaction between the two characters, the precise point at which their relationship shifts from circumstantial proximity to something that functions more like real friendship. Stewie, in the early seasons, was capable of connecting with Brian in ways he was not capable of connecting with anyone else in the household, primarily because Brian was one of the only characters who could actually hear and understand Stewie's elaborate speeches. The other Griffins responded to Stewie's world domination monologues with the mild, distracted half-attention that adults normally give to infant vocalizations. Brian listened and responded as though Stewie's words meant something. And in Road to Rhode Island, there is a brief, almost wordless moment during a night scene where the two of them are sitting together in the back of a pickup truck, watching the flat Texas darkness roll by, and neither of them is talking. It lasts only a few seconds, but the animators framed it with a care that suggests real thought went into what this shot communicated. Two very different creatures finding comfort in each other's company during an uncertain night. It is not a hidden Easter egg in the traditional sense of the word. It is more like a hidden emotional truth, embedded in an episode that most people remember only for its funnier surface moments. The Season 2 episode, Da Boom, beyond being the origin of the chicken fight, also contains one of the show's earliest experiments with consequence within a comedic frame. The episode uses the Y2K panic as its backdrop, and in the chaos that follows, the entire Griffin family ends up having to travel through a post-apocalyptic version of their world. This premise gave the writers license to show versions of familiar characters in unfamiliar states. Background characters from Spooner Street appear in the chaos scenes in various degrees of distress, and if you know these characters from later in the series, you can identify them here in their earliest appearances. Cleveland's distinctive slow bathtub exit is referenced in this episode in a way that establishes its existence within the show's internal logic, long before the running gag became one of its most famous repeated moments. Speaking of background characters, the earliest seasons of Family Guy established a supporting cast of Spooner Street residents whose lives are hinted at in background details across multiple episodes. Quagmire, Joe, and Cleveland are the most visible members of this community, but behind them is a whole ecosystem of unnamed and semi-named neighbors whose personal stories are partially legible if you pay close attention to background details in outdoor scenes. One of these background characters, a man who appears sporadically in neighborhood scenes without ever being given a formal introduction, has been dubbed Holden Caulfield by some of the production staff, reportedly because his general demeanor and occasional background interactions suggest a specific kind of literary restlessness. He is not a central character, he is not given storylines. He simply exists in the margins of the world, appearing when the shot composition requires a presence on a sidewalk or in a grocery store aisle, and disappearing the moment the scene moves on. What makes this kind of background presence interesting rather than simply incidental is that Family Guy, in its early seasons, was constructing a world that felt populated, the neighborhood felt inhabited, the town felt real. This is a quality that the show gradually lost, as the focus shifted more toward cutaway gags and less toward character-driven plots set in specific locations. In the early seasons, a scene set on Spooner Street had the texture of an actual street, with a kind of peripheral activity and human presence that makes a location feel like it exists independently of the main narrative. In later seasons, the same street would often feel emptier, more like a backdrop than a location, used primarily to establish geography before cutting to wherever the joke needed to happen. The third season episode When You Wish Upon a Weinstein is notable for having been withheld from broadcast by Fox when it was originally completed. The episode deals with Peter's relationship with Jewish culture, and Fox executives felt that some of the content was too sensitive for broadcast. It aired eventually on Cartoon Network, and later on DVD, and it contains a detail that most people who have only seen the censored broadcast version would have no way of knowing about. The original cut of the episode included a song called I Need a Jew, which is a direct parody of the song Somewhere That's Green from the musical Little Shop of Horrors. The parody relationship is not just structural. The harmonic choices and the specific phrasing of certain lyrics are close enough to the original that the comparison is clearly deliberate, and fans of musical theater who watch the episode with that knowledge hear an entirely different song from the one casual viewer's experience. Another Season 3 detail that lives specifically in the realm of hidden visual information is in the Christmas episode A Very Special Family Guy Freakin' Christmas. This episode contains a fireplace in the Griffin living room that appears only this one time across the entire series. In no other episode before or after is there a fireplace in this room. The house's internal architecture simply does not account for it in any consistent way. But in this episode, it exists, functional and decorated, because the plot required it. This kind of architectural flexibility is something the show would lean into more deliberately in later seasons, eventually reaching a point where the layout of the Griffin house became a running joke in itself. But in Season 3, the fireplace is just there, presumably added by a production designer who needed it for a Christmas scene and trusted that the audience would not be keeping score. The Season 3 episode Stuck Together, Torn Apart, in which Peter and Lois try a brief separation and explore what their lives look like apart, contains a background detail in one of the bar scenes that requires the viewer to be watching the wrong part of the screen to notice. While the foreground scene plays out with Peter at the bar, a television in the background is broadcasting what appears to be a local news program. The crawl text moving along the bottom of that fictional television broadcast contains actual jokes, written out in full as though for a real news ticker, scrolling past in the background while the main action happens in front. Some of these ticker jokes reference events that are only visible in other background details from the same episode, creating a small, self-referential loop of hidden content that exists entirely in the margins of the story. You would need to be watching the background of a background element within a background scene to catch all of it. It is an absurd commitment to hiding things that nobody would ever find, and it is completely in the spirit of everything the early show was doing. Section 3. The Revival's Secret Language. What changed in Seasons 4 and 5? When Family Guy came back from cancellation in May of 2005, it returned changed in ways that went beyond the cosmetic differences in animation style or the new quality of the television picture. The show came back carrying the weight of 3 years of absence, a scattered writing staff that had to be partially rebuilt from scratch, and an awareness of its own mythology that the early seasons had not yet had time to develop. The show knew, by 2005, that it was a cult phenomenon. It knew that people had been watching and rewatching the DVD releases, paying close attention to every frame in a way that live television viewing had never really allowed for. And this awareness shows up in Season 4 and 5 in a very specific way. The show started hiding things for the fans who would be paying that close attention. One of the earliest and most discussed hidden details from the post-revival era lives in the Season 4 episode Model Misbehavior. In this episode, the Griffin family wins a local boat race. and their victory is celebrated on the front page of a newspaper that Lois holds up for the camera. The main headline reads something like, "Lower middle class family wins regatta," which is the sort of joke the show had always done with fictional headlines. But if you pause on the DVD version of this episode and look at the smaller text further down the page, another headline becomes visible. It reads, "DVDs paused for headline joke, millions disappointed." This is a joke about itself. The show had noticed that people were pausing DVDs to read background newspaper text, and its response was to plant exactly the kind of content those people were looking for, but make it a joke at the expense of those same dedicated readers. The entire payoff is only available to the people who went looking for it. You had to be watching closely enough to pause the frame, zoom in, and read the small print, and when you did, what you found was the show laughing at you for looking. It is an incredibly specific kind of comedy, one that requires the participation of its audience to complete the loop. This same impulse, the show becoming aware of how it was being watched and embedding responses to that awareness, shows up in several other Season 4 and 5 episodes. One of the most affectionate versions of this is in the Season 4 episode North by North Quahog, where the family goes on a road trip. In a brief scene involving a car window, a background detail is visible that only makes sense as a joke for people who are watching the episode with some knowledge of the production history. The detail connects to something said in commentary tracks on the Season 1 DVD release, which means it is a response to a conversation that happened in the bonus content of a completely different release from a different time. Someone in the writing room was watching their own show's DVD extras and decided to make a joke that only people who had watched those same extras would understand. The circle of hidden communication was expanding. The Season 4 episode Blind Ambition, which is the episode containing the second Peter and Ernie the Giant chicken fight, adds retroactive depth to the chicken fight mythology. After their original encounter in Daboom, viewers had been given no further information about who Ernie was or why he continued to appear. Blind Ambition expands the world slightly by depicting Ernie in his everyday life, with a wife named Nicole and a normal domestic existence that exists in total contradiction to the chaos he unleashes every time he crosses Peter's path. Seeing Ernie at home, sitting at a dinner table and having a quiet conversation, before the scene cuts to him and Peter annihilating several city blocks in a fight that levels buildings and probably kills dozens of bystanders, is one of the show's most perfect examples of comedic contrast. But it also raises the question, which the show never formally answers but which fans have discussed extensively, of whether Ernie is himself aware of how strange and destructive their conflicts are, and whether he has a perspective on what keeps bringing them back together. The animators of the second chicken fight did something in the staging of the sequence that only becomes visible when you compare it frame by frame to the original Daboom fight. The geography of the fight, the specific streets and buildings that Peter and Ernie move through during their battle, is consistent between the two sequences. They are fighting in the same neighborhood, crossing the same intersections, crashing through the same general area of the show's map. The camera angles are different, and the specific gags are new, but the underlying geography holds together. Someone sat down and made sure that the second fight, set years later in production time, though presumably occurring within a similar temporal window in the show's internal chronology, happened in a physically coherent location relative to the first one. That kind of spatial consistency is completely invisible to the casual viewer, but it represents a genuine commitment to the show's internal world building that most people assume animated comedies never bother with. Season 5 brought one of the most ambitious hidden details the show had produced to that point. In the episode Road to Rupert, which sent Brian and Stewie on a classic road trip adventure in search of Stewie's beloved stuffed bear, the animators embedded something into the closing sequence that requires extraordinary attention to catch. As the two characters settle into the car for the final leg of their journey, there is a shot of the road ahead of them seen through the windshield. The background landscape that stretches out in front of them is not generic. It is a landscape that, if you have been paying attention to the geography established in earlier episodes, specifically tracks with the route they would logically have been taking to get back to their starting point. The animators drew in a specific sequence of visual landmarks that corresponds to an actual path through the show's internal geography. Nobody asked them to do this. It serves no narrative purpose. It is a gift from the production team to the 3 or 4 people in the world who would be paying close enough attention to notice. The Season 5 episode Barely Legal, in which Meg develops feelings for Brian after he takes her to her prom as a reluctant favor, contains a detail about Chris Griffin that most viewers completely overlook. When Chris performs a brief impression in one scene, the specific impression he does, and the way his voice and body language change for it, is a coded reference to the way Seth Green auditioned for the role of Chris Griffin in the first place. Green, who had significant career experience before joining Family Guy, was apparently challenged by a friend during his audition to do his best impression of a specific character from a specific film. The impression he delivered was so unexpected and so specifically wrong for the role of a teenage cartoon boy that the casting team found it hilarious, and it reportedly clinched his casting. The brief glimpse of Chris doing a similar impression in Barely Legal is a private thank you from the writers to Seth Green for that moment, embedded in an episode that otherwise has nothing to do with casting history. Season 4 also introduced what would become one of the show's most persistent and most analyzed recurring visual gags. The figure of James Woods, the Hollywood actor who became a recurring character in the show due to MacFarlane's friendship with him, began appearing in increasingly hidden contexts during this period. One of the most discussed examples involves a scene in which James Woods, dressed as Peter Griffin, can be briefly spotted in the background of a news studio during a scene where Meg and Neil Goldman are working as junior news anchors. He appears for only a moment, clearly visible if you are watching the edges of the frame rather than the center, then disappears as the shot changes. He is never acknowledged by any character. His presence in the scene is never explained. And the question of why James Woods, dressed as Peter, is lurking in a news studio background is the kind of thing that Family Guy's hidden detail community has been cheerfully unable to answer for 2 decades. The Season 4 and 5 era is also when the show began constructing what fans have come to call the meta-architecture. This is the network of self-referential jokes and hidden acknowledgments that the show built around its own existence as a television program. One of the most affectionate pieces of this meta-architecture lives in the Luke Perry gag from Season 4's episode about the school newspaper. Peter is looking for material and picks up a TV guide. The camera holds on the guide for just long enough that a dedicated viewer with a pause button can read the small print beneath Luke Perry's photo on the cover. The text reads, "If you can read this, Family Guy is on the air." This is a joke that only works if you understand what it was like to be a Family Guy fan in 2002 and 2003, when the show had been canceled and its future was genuinely uncertain. The Adult Swim reruns were pulling huge numbers, but there was no guarantee of new episodes. DVD sales were strong, but networks were not in the habit of reviving dead shows based on home video performance. The message hidden in that TV guide, this tiny print that nobody could read at broadcast speeds, is essentially a message from the writers to the hardcore fans who were watching closely enough to notice, "We made it back, and we put this here for you specifically." Section 4. What the Chicken hides the deep lore of Ernie and the fight sequences. Every single fight between Peter Griffin and Ernie the Giant Chicken is a masterpiece of hidden information, and most people only ever watch them for the surface-level action. The fights are spectacular on their own terms. They are extended, lovingly animated sequences of escalating destruction that do not belong in the middle of whatever episode is happening around them. They arrive without warning. They end without explanation, and the show picks right back up where it left off as though nothing happened. But if you watch every single fight from Season 2 through the show's later seasons, treating them as connected events rather than isolated gags, you start to see patterns and embedded details that suggest these sequences are far more carefully constructed than their deliberately random presentation implies. The first fight, the one from Daboom in Season 2, is relatively short by the standards of what would follow. It establishes the geography without being particularly specific about it. Peter and Ernie move through what appears to be a commercial district of the show's version of the town, crashing through storefronts and over cars. The specific businesses they destroy in this first fight are notable for being the kinds of establishments that appear in subsequent street-level scenes throughout the show's early seasons. The animators were not placing Peter and Ernie in randomly generated commercial streets. They were placing them in a specific part of a specific world that the show was actively building. The second fight, in Blind Ambition during Season 4, is dramatically longer and substantially more complex. This is the sequence that established the basic template that all subsequent fights would follow, an escalating series of environments, each one presenting new obstacles and opportunities for increasingly creative violence, ending with what appears to be a definitive resolution that is immediately undermined when Ernie is shown alive after Peter walks away. The length of this second fight was a statement of intent. The show was declaring that the chicken fight was not a one-time gag but a recurring institution, and that each subsequent appearance would be expected to surpass what had come before. Embedded in the second fight is a specific visual callback to the first one. For approximately 4 frames, the background during one of the outdoor chase sequences matches almost exactly with the background from the Daboom fight. The angle is different and the time of day is rendered differently by the color treatment, but the specific building facades are the same ones. It is a blink and you miss it confirmation that these fights are happening in a consistent physical space, that Ernie and Peter keep crossing the same territory in their battles, perhaps because their conflict returns them to the site of its origin. The third fight, which appears in No Chris Left Behind during Season 5, is where the sequence begins to expand its physical scope beyond the immediate neighborhood. This fight sends Peter and Ernie through the interior of multiple buildings and eventually into the air via a construction crane sequence that takes the staging to a genuinely cinematic scale. The background detail embedded in this fight involves specific artwork and signage visible inside the buildings they crash through. One of these buildings is clearly intended to be a graphic design firm of some kind, and the framed prints visible on its walls include several pieces that are slightly degraded versions of real commercial artwork from the mid-2000s era. Whether this was a licensed reference or simply an animator working from reference materials they had on hand is not entirely clear, but the specificity of the imagery suggests that someone made deliberate choices about what to put on those walls rather than simply generating generic placeholder art. The fourth major fight appears in Meet the Quagmires during Season 5, in the context of the time travel episode where Peter accidentally creates a version of the past in which he and Lois never ended up together. This version of the fight is particularly interesting from a hidden detail perspective because it is set in the past, specifically in a version of 1984, and the animators use the period setting as an opportunity to embed a series of decade-specific cultural references into the background staging. The cars that Peter and Ernie fight across and through are period-appropriate models. The storefronts they crash through represent businesses that would have existed in the 1980s. The fashion visible on background pedestrians fleeing the destruction is meticulously of its time. Someone on the art team clearly enjoyed the excuse to recreate a specific historical moment, and they filled the frame with as much of it as the sequence's pacing would allow. By the time the sixth major fight arrives in the Season 6 episode Peter's Daughter, the sequence has developed enough of its own internal grammar that the animators were beginning to make jokes within the established language of the gag. This fight contains a moment where a bystander who has presumably witnessed one of these battles before makes eye contact with the camera in a way that acknowledges the absurdity of the whole situation and then simply moves aside to let the chaos pass. It is a tiny bit of business that lasts less than 2 seconds, easily missed if you are watching the main action, but it represents a kind of institutional self-awareness within the show's world. Some of the residents of Peter's town have apparently seen this enough times that they have developed protocols for it. The chicken fight sequences also contain a deeply hidden running element that only becomes apparent when you watch all of them with careful attention to the specific wounds and damage that accumulate across fights. Ernie the giant chicken, whose immortality is a fundamental part of his characterization, is shown recovering from definitively fatal injuries at the end of each battle. But the recovery is not instantaneous. In several of the later fights, particularly those from Seasons 8 through 12, the animators included brief details suggesting that Ernie still carries marks from previous encounters. A scar in a location where he received a specific injury 2 or 3 fights ago. A slight asymmetry in his stance that was not present in his earliest appearances. These are extraordinarily subtle details on a character who already exists in a broadly stylized animation environment. Catching them requires watching back-to-back fights with specific attention to body geometry, which is exactly the kind of obsessive viewing that the show's most dedicated fans are fully prepared to do. Ernie also has a life outside of his fights with Peter that the show has only partially illuminated, and the details of this parallel existence are scattered in small amounts across multiple episodes. His wife Nicole is established as also being a giant chicken, and she has appeared in brief segments that depict their domestic life with the same affectionate specificity that the show applies to human couples. Their home is detailed enough that viewers who have spotted it in background shots have identified specific furniture and decorative elements that suggest a particular aesthetic and economic background. They are, by all indications, a perfectly ordinary middle-class family of enormous anthropomorphic birds, and the violence that Ernie periodically enacts across the town is entirely compartmentalized from this ordinary family life in a way that the show never addresses directly, but that creates a quiet, absurdist irony that rewards consideration. There is also the matter of Ernie's son, who is identified in passing as having attended the same preschool class as Stewie at some point in the show's timeline. This is an astonishing detail when you stop to think about it. Stewie Griffin and the son of Ernie the Giant Chicken apparently spent time in the same early childhood educational environment. The implications for what those classroom days might have been like, given what we know about both families, are left entirely to the imagination. No episode has ever explored this. It exists only as a piece of background information delivered in the most offhand possible way, a hidden thread dangling from the edge of the show's fabric, inviting a story that has never been told. The final chicken fight, which occurred in a late-season episode and resulted in Ernie's permanent death at the hands of Meg Griffin, who decapitates him in a moment that was shocking, precisely because the show had spent so many years establishing Ernie's apparent immortality, contained perhaps the most emotionally resonant hidden detail in the entire history of the gag. In the immediate aftermath of his death, there is a single frame in which Ernie's face, as he falls, carries an expression that is almost unmistakably peaceful. Not frightened, not defiant, not enraged, peaceful. Whether this was a deliberate animation choice intended to suggest that Ernie had reached some form of resolution in his long conflict with Peter, or whether it was simply the natural settling of a character design in a falling pose, is impossible to know for certain. But it is there, lasting less than a quarter of a second, and it has been captured in screenshots and discussed by fans who felt that it gave the whole long arc of the character an emotional coda it had probably not been designed to have. The legacy of the chicken fights extends beyond the episodes themselves into the show's broader construction of humor. They represent the show's most pure version of a very specific kind of comedy. The joke that is too big for its container, that keeps expanding past the frame of the episode trying to hold it, that refuses to end when narrative logic suggests it should. And hidden within this framework of gleeful excess are all of these small, carefully embedded details that suggest the sequences were never as random as they appeared. Someone was always watching the geography. Someone was always tracking the wounds. Someone was always thinking about what it meant that this enormous fight kept happening to the same man in the same neighborhood with the same incomprehensible chicken, and leaving small traces of that thinking in places where only the most attentive eyes would find them. Section 5. Spooner Street and the Neighbors, the hidden world behind the main cast. One of the most enduring hidden pleasures of Family Guy is the world that exists at the edges of its main cast, the supporting characters and background neighbors whose lives are glimpsed only in fragments but who, taken together, constitute a remarkably rich secondary layer of storytelling. Quagmire, Joe, and Cleveland are the most developed members of this peripheral community, but even within their well-established characterizations, there are hidden details and embedded histories that the show has never fully explained. And behind them, filling the streets and yards and businesses of the show's world, is a population of semi-regular faces whose appearances across dozens of episodes create a texture of background life that rewards patient, attentive watching. Joe Swanson's introduction in the very first season contains a detail that becomes more interesting the more of the show you have seen. Joe's debut episode, titled A Hero Sits Next Door, presents him as the cool new neighbor who moves in next door to the Griffins, the man who is capable and impressive despite using a wheelchair. Peter is openly jealous of Joe's popularity, which is a character beat that runs deeply against the trajectory that Peter and Joe's relationship would eventually take. In the later seasons, Peter would become one of the primary sources of mockery directed at Joe, making fun of his disability and his circumstances in ways that the Season 1 version of their dynamic would have made completely unthinkable. But if you watch the pilot introduction of Joe with this knowledge, Peter's jealousy in that first episode reads as a much more interesting character note. He was not just jealous of a cool neighbor, he was jealous of a man he would eventually come to diminish, and that early jealousy suggests that something in Peter recognized Joe's quality and found it threatening. The background of Joe's house, which appears in many outdoor scenes across the show's run, contains a rotating series of details related to his police career and his various enthusiasms that are only visible to viewers, paying close attention to the set dressing. Law enforcement memorabilia appears periodically on the visible surfaces of his property. A specific vehicle parked in his driveway changes model between episodes, which has been attributed partly to continuity oversights and partly to deliberate in-jokes about the frequency with which police-issued vehicles are replaced. And the garden in his yard, which receives almost no direct narrative attention across the entire run of the show, has small seasonal changes embedded in background shots that suggest the animators were maintaining an ongoing hidden record of time passing in a way that the show's deliberately ageless main cast never directly addressed. Cleveland Brown's house, before Cleveland departed for his own spin-off series, was a source of one of the show's most beloved and most analyzed running visual gags. Cleveland's bathtub, and the famous moment where he slides out of his second-floor bathroom window in the tub while someone crashes into the side of his house, became one of the show's most repeated bits. But the hidden detail embedded in this gag over the years of its repetition involves the bathroom itself. Each time the bathtub sequence is triggered, if you look carefully at the bathroom visible through the hole in the wall, there are small differences in the background details. The decor changes, objects on the shelf shift positions. The soap dish is in a different location. These differences are almost certainly continuity errors rather than intentional gags. But the fan community has developed an elaborate theory that these variations represent different moments in time, different Cleveland bathtub sessions on different days of the show's internal calendar, unified only by the perpetual coincidence that something crashes into his house at the exact moment he happens to be in there. The Drunken Clam, the bar where Peter, Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland spend a substantial portion of the show's runtime, contains more hidden details per square foot than almost any other location in the show. The bar itself has a specific layout that appears inconsistent across episodes, with the position of the main bar counter, the placement of the pool table, and the configuration of the booths all varying depending on what the scene requires. But within this flexible architecture, certain elements remain constant. The decoration on the back wall behind the bar, which includes a collection of signs and memorabilia, has been analyzed by fans in enormous detail. Several of the pieces visible in this collection are clearly references to real bars in Providence and other Rhode Island locations that Seth MacFarlane would have frequented during his time at RISD. They are not direct reproductions of specific real-world signage, but the style and character of the decoration is specific enough that someone with knowledge of Providence bar culture from the late 1990s would recognize the visual language immediately. There is also a hidden piece of text embedded in the Drunken Clam's main sign, visible in outdoor establishing shots but only readable with significant magnification. The text is small enough that broadcast television resolution in the early seasons would have made it completely illegible, and it only became findable with the advent of high-definition streaming. What the text says, when you can finally read it, is a line from a specific Rat Pack song that Seth MacFarlane, who is a devoted and accomplished singer of big band and jazz standards, has performed publicly on multiple occasions. It is a private dedication, hidden in the name of a fictional bar, placed there by a creator who knew it would almost certainly never be seen. Quagmire's house is located directly next to the Griffin House, and this proximity has given the show opportunities over many seasons to embed hidden details in the relationship between the two properties. One of the most consistently fascinating of these involves Quagmire's home's exterior and what is visible through his windows in background shots during outdoor scenes. In several episodes, if you look at Quagmire's house while the main action is happening on the street in front of the Griffin residence, there are figures visible through his windows. These figures are not always identifiable, but their presence and sometimes their apparent activity creates a constant background suggestion that something is always happening inside that house, just out of frame, just beyond the edges of the main story. The show has never explicitly confirmed what is implied by these background window shots, but the implication sits there, quiet and persistent, in shot after shot across a remarkably large number of seasons. Meg Griffin's room is a location that received very little detailed attention in the early seasons, which is itself a hidden statement about how her place in the family was perceived. While Stewie's room was extensively detailed and Chris's room was characterized through his visible possessions, Meg's room was drawn with a relative sparseness that communicated her secondary status within the domestic hierarchy without anyone having to say a word about it. In the first 3 seasons, what you can see of Meg's room suggests a girl who has tried to create a personal space for herself but whose personality has not yet been allowed full expression. The posters on her wall and the objects on her shelves are the kinds of generic, aspirational elements that a teenager with limited resources would accumulate. They tell you about someone who wants things but has not yet been given the freedom or the resources to fully express who she is. As the show progressed into later seasons and Meg's mistreatment became more explicit, her room's appearance tracked with her declining status within the household's visual vocabulary. The colors became slightly more muted. The visible personal effects became fewer and less specific. By the time the show was deep into its most difficult period for Meg, her room and background shots had the quality of a space that had been gradually allowed to become less than it started out as, reflecting in the visual language of the set design exactly what was happening to the character herself. In pointed contrast, Stewie's nursery becomes more elaborate with every passing season. This expansion of his personal space is documented in hidden details across many episodes. The standard nursery furniture of his first appearances, the crib and the changing table and the toy chest, gradually accumulates additional elements that suggest an expanding and increasingly secretive domestic laboratory. Storage solutions that do not fit the scale of an infant's room. Work surfaces at heights that would be convenient for someone of Stewie's intelligence and physical capability, but entirely inexplicable for a normal baby. Shelving that corresponds to the organization of someone who has significant quantities of specialized materials and prefers to keep them carefully sorted. All of these elements are introduced gradually enough that no single episode makes a dramatic reveal of them. They simply accumulate, in the background, season by season, as though Stewie has been quietly renovating his room between episodes and the cameras are only catching glimpses of the ongoing project. Herbert the Pervert, who is voiced by Mike Henry and appears as a recurring neighbor with an inappropriate interest in young Chris Griffin, is one of the most carefully handled recurring background characters in the show, from a hidden detail perspective. His house, visible in neighborhood exterior shots, is consistent in its general character across the show's run. The overgrown quality of his property, the specific placement of his porch swing, the detail of his front door and its peculiar knock, all of these elements are established in his earliest appearances and maintained with unusual consistency through subsequent ones. One episode, in a piece of background trivia, hints that Herbert's actual name may be Roy Mitchell, a detail delivered as an almost throwaway aside that opens up an entire set of questions about who this character was before he became the version we see sitting on his porch and watching the neighborhood. That name, Roy Mitchell, carries the weight of a whole biography that the show has never told, leaving Herbert as someone who exists entirely in the present tense of his appearances with a past that is only gestured at. The street itself, Spooner Street, changes in ways that are easy to overlook when you are watching episodes individually, but become clear when you compare exterior shots from different seasons. The proportions of the houses relative to each other shift. The distances between properties fluctuate. The presence or absence of specific trees and shrubs in front yards varies episode by episode in ways that have nothing to do with seasonal changes within the show's narrative. The show's geographic consistency was always treated with a light hand, prioritizing the needs of each scene over strict fidelity to a fixed map. But within this flexibility, certain elements remain anchored. The Griffin house's red door, the mailbox at the end of their walk, the specific lean of the tree in the front yard. These constants create the visual shorthand of home regardless of whatever is inconsistent around them, and they are there in every exterior shot, small and unchanging, while everything else shifts according to what the comedy needs. Section 6. The animation Easter eggs. Production secrets in every frame. The animation of Family Guy carries its own layer of hidden information, distinct from the narrative Easter eggs and visual jokes embedded in the content. Production details, studio signatures, references to the specific people and processes involved in making the show. All of these things live in the technical fabric of the animation itself, and they require a very particular kind of attention to find. Family Guy's animation production has always involved external studios working in various locations, primarily in South Korea, where much of the actual drawing and coloring is done. This is standard practice for American animated series, and it creates a situation where the people executing the animation frames are working from storyboards and design documents produced in Los Angeles, applying color and movement to content they sometimes encounter largely without context. Within this system, individual animators and their teams have periodically left small marks in their work that serve as signatures or Easter eggs specific to the production pipeline rather than the show's creative team. The most documented of these production side Easter eggs involves a specific style of drawing that appears in certain background elements across a collection of episodes handled by a particular Korean studio during the show's middle seasons. When examined closely, certain tree branches and cloud formations in outdoor establishing shots during these episodes have a curvilinear quality that is slightly distinct from the rest of the show's visual style. Fan analysts who have looked carefully at these episodes have connected this quality to a specific artist whose signature work appears in the background landscapes of other animated productions handled by the same studio. It is a style fingerprint rather than an intentional Easter egg, but finding it across multiple episodes creates the experience of spotting a hidden craftsperson's mark embedded in the work, the animation equivalent of a stonemason carving their initials into the underside of a cathedral vault. The change in animation studios across the show's run has been extensively documented in fan analyses, and the differences between the visual styles of Rough Draft Studios, who handled seasons 2 and 3, and the studios that took over in subsequent seasons, are more significant than casual viewers typically recognize. Rough Draft's approach gave the early revival-era episodes a particular quality of movement, a looseness and fluidity in the character animation that the show's later periods largely lost. The animators at Rough Draft were working with specific reference materials provided by the production team in Los Angeles, and in several episodes from seasons 2 and 3, the way secondary characters move in the background while the main action happens in the foreground carries a quality of improvisation within structure that suggests those background animators were given unusual latitude to develop the peripheral performances. One of the most purely delightful examples of this is in the season 2 episode, Peter, Caviar Eater, where the Griffin family temporarily inhabits Lois's wealthy family's mansion. The background servants and staff who move through the mansion's rooms during party scenes are animated with specific individual characterizations that go far beyond what any standard background direction would call for. Each servant has a distinct way of moving, a particular gait or posture or set of gestures that gives them a personality that exists entirely in their physical behavior, since none of them speak. The lead animators at Rough Draft apparently went considerably beyond the minimum requirements of the scene in rendering these figures, and the result is a background environment populated with people who feel genuinely alive and individual, even though the camera almost never points directly at any of them. The season 6 and 7 episodes, handled by Digital Emotion and by a studio called Yedem, show a different approach to background animation that itself became a source of hidden production history. Critics and fans noted that these episodes had a quality that was technically competent but felt less expressive than the Rough Draft seasons, and the specific technical reason for this was eventually traced to the use of digital drawing tablets rather than traditional cell animation methods. The digital workflow produced cleaner lines and more consistent coloring but sacrificed some of the organic variation in line weight and movement that hand-drawn animation naturally creates. This transition is itself a hidden document of the animation industry's shift from traditional to digital methods during the mid-2000s, preserved in the specific visual quality of these episodes. Within the digital animation era, certain individual frames contain technical artifacts that the production team sometimes left in place rather than cleaning up, either because they served a comedic purpose or because the timeline did not allow for correction. Some of these artifacts have become beloved by fans precisely because they sit outside the show's normally polished presentation. One recurring example involves the way certain characters' outlines behave when they overlap, creating brief moments where the standard visual hierarchy of the character designs breaks down in interesting ways. These moments are not Easter eggs in the intentional sense. They are production realities, but the fan community has developed a practice of cataloging them as part of the show's hidden visual history, treating animation artifacts with the same affectionate attention they give to deliberate embedded jokes. The opening credits sequence, which is probably the single most carefully examined segment of the entire show, contains several animation Easter eggs that required genuinely high-resolution inspection to discover. One of the most discussed involves the background dancers visible during the theatrical production number. These dancers, who appear in the midground of the wide shots, are not entirely consistent between seasons. In several early seasons, the dancers include figures whose character designs do not match any other character in the show, suggesting they may be caricatures of production crew members, a common practice in animation where background crowd scenes are populated with inside references to the people who work on the show. The Griffin's movements during the opening number have also been analyzed frame by frame, and specific gestures within the choreography have been identified as referencing other famous television opening credit sequences from the 1970s and 1980s. The show was always deeply interested in the visual language of that era's television, and embedding references to it in the opening credits, which itself parodies the visual style of those same programs, creates a layered piece of homage that reads quite differently depending on how much television history the viewer brings to it. The Season 8 episode Brian and Stewie, which kept the two characters locked in a bank vault for the entire episode and had no cutaway gags, is, from a production standpoint, one of the most unusual episodes in the show's history. The entire episode was animated in a single, continuous visual environment, the interior of a bank vault, without the shifts in location and the quick cuts that characterize almost every other episode of the series. This gave the animators an opportunity to develop a single set in extraordinary detail, and they took it. The interior of the vault is filled with specific objects, specific textures, specific details about the financial records and safety deposit boxes stored within it that are far more thoroughly rendered than any location typically receives in a standard Family Guy episode. The show almost never lingers in one place long enough to justify this level of background detail, so having an entire episode set in one room gave the art department space to do something they rarely had the opportunity to do. Hidden within the vault's visual richness are specific items that dedicated fans have spent considerable time trying to identify, including documents visible through the glass fronts of certain deposit boxes that contain what appear to be actual text rather than generic placeholder scribbles. Section 7. The creator's fingerprints, MacFarlane's hidden autobiographical details. Seth MacFarlane has spent more than 2 decades putting himself into Family Guy in ways that range from the extremely obvious to the almost completely invisible. The most visible version of this is, of course, his voice work. He voices Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire, 4 of the show's most prominent characters, and in doing so he is present in virtually every scene of every episode in some form. But beyond the voice acting, MacFarlane embedded pieces of his own life, his education, his taste, his politics, his professional history, and even his personal fears into the show in ways that require knowledge of his biography to fully recognize. The Rhode Island School of Design connection is woven through the earliest seasons in multiple ways beyond the geographical setting. MacFarlane's time there, where he studied animation, gave him a foundation in visual art that shows up in specific design choices made during the show's early years. The color palette of the show's first 3 seasons, before the studio transitions changed its visual character, reflects a particular approach to animation that is associated with the RISD tradition of balancing formal discipline with expressive freedom. The backgrounds of the earliest episodes have a quality of considered composition, of shots arranged with genuine visual intelligence rather than simply functional staging. That speaks to a creator who had been trained to think carefully about what a frame communicates beyond its narrative content. MacFarlane's near miss with the 11th of September 2001 attacks is embedded in the show in a way that most viewers encounter, without knowing the full context. MacFarlane was booked on American Airlines Flight 11 on the morning of that day, the same flight that was hijacked and flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. He missed his flight because his agent had given him the wrong departure time. He arrived at the gate just after boarding had closed and was told he would need to take a later flight. The close call is referenced in a cutaway gag in one of the show's episodes, where a character survives a disaster by being late due to watching a football game the previous night. MacFarlane has confirmed in interviews that this was a personal reference to his own experience, coded in the show's familiar cutaway language, so that most viewers would experience it as simply another random gag. But for anyone who knows the history, the frame carries an extraordinary weight. MacFarlane's deep love of musical theater, and particularly of the Rat Pack era of American entertainment, shows up in hidden ways throughout the show's run. Brian's character, as MacFarlane plays him, has always had a quality of the cosmopolitan sophisticate, the character who appreciates the finer things and holds himself to a higher cultural standard than those around him. This is partly a comedy device, the straight man in an absurd world, but it also reflects MacFarlane's own genuine sensibility. The specific cultural touchstones that Brian references in conversation, the specific music that plays during scenes set in Brian's apartment or car, the specific books visible on Brian's shelf in close-up shots of his personal space, all of these are direct windows into MacFarlane's own tastes and interests. Finding a book on Brian's shelf in a background shot that McFarlane has mentioned in an interview as a personal favorite is finding the creator inside his creation. The Season 4 episode Petarded, in which Peter is tested and found to have an intellectual disability, contains a specific scene in a courtroom that includes a detail only findable by pausing and reading the text visible on several documents that pass through frame. These documents, which are part of the episode's legal storyline, contain text that has been identified as drawn from a specific legal document that was in the news at the time of the episode's production. McFarlane has occasionally brought current events directly into background text rather than into the dialogue or main action, creating a kind of hidden newspaper within the show that documents what was happening in the world at the time of production without ever explicitly acknowledging it in the episode itself. The episode If I'm Dying, I'm Lying, where Peter tries to bring back the fictional Gumball 2 Gumball, is one of the clearest examples of McFarlane processing his professional history through comedy. Gumball 2. Gumball was a real pitch that he made to Fox very early in his career, before Family Guy was ordered to series. The pitch did not succeed, but McFarlane came back to it years later and put it into the mouth of his most prominent character, making it the show Peter Griffin loves best, the show he is willing to commit fraud and spiritual manipulation to bring back. There is something both funny and touching about this. McFarlane took his own professional rejection and turned it into an expression of pure, unironic enthusiasm, filtered through a character whose enthusiasms are always out of proportion to their objects. The show he couldn't get made became, within the fiction, the show most worth fighting for. McFarlane's political convictions, which have always been prominent and which he has expressed publicly throughout his career, appear in hidden forms throughout the show's run in a way that is different from the more explicit political commentary delivered through Brian's speeches. The background political signage in crowd scenes during election-related episodes, for instance, consistently contains details that reflect a specific political perspective without ever making that perspective the subject of the main action. Bumper stickers visible on cars during driving scenes have been captured and cataloged by fans who found that they form a coherent political statement when read as a collection rather than as individual background elements. The Blue Harvest episode from Season 6, the Family Guy parody of Star Wars Episode 4, contains a deeply buried McFarlane autobiographical detail in a background element of the opening space battle sequence. The Star Destroyer that appears in those opening shots has a small bumper sticker visible on its hull. The sticker reads Bush Cheney 04. It is a dig at the Bush administration that was in power at the time of the episode's production, coded in the language of the fictional enemy's vehicles. McFarlane has been open about his political opposition to that administration, and embedding this specific marker on the episode's primary symbol of authoritarian power was a deliberate choice. But the placement is small enough and the episode moves fast enough that most viewers never read it. The song that serves as the primary theme of the Wasted Talent episode, where Peter discovers and then loses his piano abilities, is one of the most thoroughly autobiographical pieces of music in the show's history. The melody, the specific choices about key and tempo and harmonic movement, reflect McFarlane's genuine musical knowledge and his specific love for a particular era of American popular music. He has spoken in interviews about his love of the Rat Pack and the Great American Songbook, and those influences are audible in the compositional choices made for this episode in ways that go beyond what most animated comedy soundtracks attempt. The episode uses its musical content to do something subtle and real. It lets a creator put his genuine love of something beautiful into a show that is largely about the ridiculous, treating it seriously enough that the beauty is actually present in the joke. Section 8. The Griffin House decoded architecture, rooms, and spatial impossibilities. The house at 31 Spooner Street is, from an architectural standpoint, a complete impossibility. If you tried to build it according to the dimensions implied by any given episode, you would end up with a structure that makes no physical sense. Rooms appear in places where no room could be given the established exterior of the building. Staircases lead to hallways that could not exist given the floor plan visible from outside. The number of stairs required to reach the second floor varies from 5 to 12, depending on the scene. The kitchen is simultaneously adjacent to the living room and somehow also accessible from a back hallway that has no relationship to the house's established geometry. And yet the house feels real. It feels like a place. The reason for this is that the specific elements that are always the same, The red door, the green couch, the bay window in the living room, the orange cabinets in the kitchen, the particular color of the kitchen walls, function as spatial anchors that override the architectural impossibilities. The human brain uses these recurring landmarks to construct a sense of place that does not depend on geometric consistency. You know you are in the Griffin house not because you can map it, but because you recognize the things that are always in it. The hidden details embedded in this spatially flexible house are fascinating, precisely because of this flexibility. When a fireplace appears in the living room for a Christmas episode and never appears again, it is not an error. It is the house adjusting itself to the needs of the season. When a downstairs bathroom materializes in one episode and is never referenced before or after, the house has temporarily acquired a room because the story required it. The building at 31 Spooner Street is less a physical structure than a collection of domestic feelings, and the rooms within it are less architectural spaces than emotional territories that expand and contract according to what each episode needs to say. Stewie's room is the most extensively hidden, detailed space in the entire house. What appears on the surface to be a standard nursery, with its crib and its toy chest and its changing table, is revealed in glimpses across many seasons to be a substantially more elaborate environment than it first appears. Behind the surface of the nursery's infant-appropriate decor is the infrastructure of Stewie's actual operations. Blueprints are visible in episodes when Stewie is in the middle of a project. Specialized equipment appears when the plot requires it. A weapons storage area, referred to in production materials as something close to a miniature version of Dexter's Laboratory from the Cartoon Network show of the same name, is accessible through or behind standard nursery furniture in ways that have been depicted inconsistently across episodes. Sometimes it is behind a door that should not be there given the room's visible dimensions. Sometimes it is under the floor. Sometimes it appears to simply be its own small annex off the main nursery space, existing in architectural territory that has no relationship to the rest of the upstairs layout. The nursery also contains one of the show's most persistent small jokes, embedded in the decoration rather than the architecture. The mobile that hangs above Stewie's crib, which rotates gently in the standard way of all cartoon infant mobiles, is in the early seasons populated with the standard pastel shapes expected of such an object. But by the middle seasons, if you look carefully at the specific shapes on the mobile, they have been quietly replaced with recognizable silhouettes. The shapes are small and the rotation makes them difficult to read at broadcast speed, but fans who have captured and zoomed in on still frames during episodes where the mobile is in background focus have found that its shapes include small versions of various weapons and scientific instruments that correspond to Stewie's areas of interest. The mobile has been secretly transformed by its occupant into a catalog of his obsessions, hanging above the crib in plain sight, while Lois cheerfully attends to her infant son directly beneath it. Peter and Lois's bedroom, which is on the opposite side of the upstairs from Stewie's nursery, contains its own set of recurring background details that reward extended attention. The nightstand on Peter's side of the bed has accumulated objects across seasons that suggest a specific set of midnight habits and late-night interests. The books and magazines visible on his nightstand are not always the same between episodes, and they have been analyzed as a kind of ongoing background character study. In certain episodes from the middle seasons, the nightstand contents include items that are callbacks to specific earlier episodes, objects that should only be there if Peter has held on to them across the intervening story time. Whether these are intentional continuity placements or coincidental reuse of design elements is the kind of question that has no definitively satisfying answer, but it generates exactly the kind of speculation that makes revisiting episodes a different experience each time. Chris Griffin's room, cluttered and expressive where Meg's room is comparatively bare, contains background details that reflect his specific personality in ways that go beyond the obvious poster choices. The floor of Chris's room, visible in shots where he is sitting or lying down, shows the specific debris pattern of a room belonging to someone who creates things, or tries to, with materials that do not quite produce finished results. There are art supplies in various states of depletion. There are craft projects in various states of completion. There are the physical remains of enthusiasms that were pursued with intensity and then abandoned. It is a room that tells you this is a person who feels things strongly and acts on those feelings, but whose relationship with completion and follow-through is imperfect. All of this is in the background. None of it is ever commented on by any character. It simply accumulates, a portrait of someone rendered in scattered objects on a messy floor. The basement of the Griffin house, which appears periodically but not consistently, functions differently in different episodes in ways that create a small taxonomy of domestic spaces. Sometimes it is the location of Peter's various experimental projects and man cave ambitions. Sometimes it is straightforwardly used as storage. In one memorable episode, it becomes a hiding place. In another, it is briefly converted to something resembling a speakeasy. The basement's willingness to be whatever the story needs it to be is the most concentrated expression of the whole house's architectural flexibility, and within this flexibility, the space accumulates details from episode to episode that suggest not one basement but a whole collection of possible basements, each one the same space refracted through a different narrative necessity. The kitchen's blue carpet is one of the show's most discussed architectural peculiarities among fans who approach the show with any interest in interior design logic. Carpet in a kitchen is unusual in the real world because kitchens are messy environments where hard floors are far more practical. The blue carpet in the Griffin kitchen has no practical justification within the logic of the space. It simply exists, unchanging and unexplained, across the entire run of the show. Fan theories about its origin range from the practical, that it was an animation department choice that became locked in as part of the show's visual identity, to the elaborately narrative, that it reflects a specific decision made by a specific Griffin at a specific point in the family's history before the events of the series began. None of these theories have ever been confirmed or denied by anyone associated with the show. The orange cabinets that characterize the kitchen's visual identity are a different kind of hidden detail. They are very specific orange, not the generic neutral of most animated kitchen spaces, and this specific warm tone has been traced by design-minded fans to a particular era of American kitchen design. The color is characteristic of kitchen renovations done in the 1970s, suggesting that the Griffin kitchen was most recently updated by Lois, or perhaps by the previous owners of the house, at some point in the decade before the series began. This would be consistent with what the show establishes about the economic realities of the Griffin family. They live in a house that was purchased within their means and maintained rather than renovated, which means the kitchen would still look like a kitchen from an era before the show's present day. The orange cabinets are a piece of socio-economic character detail expressed through set design. Section 9. The Cutaway Universe Callbacks and Connections Across Decades. The cutaway gags of Family Guy have their own internal logic that most viewers never fully perceive because perceiving it requires watching the show with a kind of retrospective attention that the gags themselves, by their very nature, discourage. A cutaway is designed to be fast. It arrives, delivers a joke, and disappears. The last thing its creators want is for the audience to linger on it or think carefully about how it connects to other things. And yet, if you watch the cutaways of Family Guy with the accumulated awareness of someone who has seen every episode multiple times, patterns emerge, connections appear. Gags from one episode echo and respond to gags from episodes years before and after them, creating a hidden web of comedic cross-reference that exists beneath the surface of the show's apparent randomness. One of the most thoroughly documented examples of this involves the recurring figure of Lois's father, Carter Pewterschmidt, and the specific set of upper-class activities and assumptions that his cutaway appearances catalog. Carter is a man of specific tastes and consistent prejudices, and the cutaways involving him across multiple episodes, while always self-contained as jokes, collectively build a portrait of his character and his world that is more detailed than anything his direct appearances in main storylines provide. Reading his cutaway appearances as a connected series rather than as isolated gags gives you a biography of a man who has been wealthy for long enough that his wealth has become invisible to him, like the air he breathes, and whose interactions with people who do not share his economic position are characterized by a specific kind of cheerful incomprehension that is both funny and quietly devastating. The Cutaway universe also contains a running thread of callbacks to the show's own history that functions as a hidden continuity within the apparent discontinuity of the format. One recurring element involves the specific way certain recurring joke characters appear across multiple cutaways in different episodes. Vern and Johnny, a vaudeville-style comedy duo, appeared in a series of cutaways across episodes from seasons 4 through 6, in which they performed brief bits of old-fashioned comedy that are completely out of step with the sensibility of the show around them. Their appearances feel like transmissions from a different era of entertainment entirely, but if you collect all of their cutaway appearances and watch them in sequence, They form a short, connected narrative arc. Their material develops, their chemistry deepens. Their relationship to the audience within the cutaway world evolves. The arc has a beginning, a middle, and an end that is only visible if you know to look for it across episodes that air years apart and that most viewers experience as completely unrelated. The Robot Chicken references embedded across several cutaways are particularly rich territory. Robot Chicken is a sketch comedy show created by Seth Green, who voices Chris Griffin. The relationship between Family Guy and Robot Chicken is characterized by a kind of competitive affection, the shows operating in similar territory with different approaches and maintaining an ongoing background dialogue about their respective methods. Family Guy's cutaways occasionally make direct reference to Robot Chicken's style, treating the comparison with the self-deprecating directness the show typically reserves for its most self-aware moments. But the layering of this comes from the fact that Chris Griffin, voiced by Seth Green, is always conspicuously absent from these Robot Chicken references. The character, who is literally voiced by Robot Chicken's creator, never joins in when the topic comes up. His absence is the joke, but you can only catch it if you are specifically looking for who is not saying anything. The Star Wars universe that the show built across Blue Harvest, Something 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 Darkside, and It's a Trap carries an extraordinary density of hidden connections, both to the actual Star Wars films and to the internal history of Family Guy itself. Blue Harvest, the title of the first episode in the trilogy, is itself an Easter egg. Blue Harvest was the official working title used during the production of Return of the Jedi to disguise what was actually being filmed. The production team used the cover name to prevent leaks and location-related disruptions during the shoot, and it appeared on crew materials and production documents throughout the making of the film before the actual title was made public. Using it as the title of Family Guy's Star Wars parody is a specific piece of film history knowledge embedded in a title card, invisible to anyone who does not know the story of Return of the Jedi's production. Within the Blue Harvest episode itself, the cantina scene in the Mos Eisley bar contains a collection of background characters that constitute one of the most affectionate tributes to the extended universe of animated television ever assembled. Sharing the cantina space with the Star Wars aliens are Bender from Futurama, Roger the alien from American Dad, Coach John McGurk from Home Movies, and the evil monkey from Family Guy's own mythology. These characters are all in the background simultaneously, occupying the same fictional space during the same fictional moment, and none of them are acknowledged by any character in the foreground. They simply exist there, together, in a bar in a galaxy far, far away, representing the breadth of animated television that was being made in the early 2000s. The Something 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 Darkside movie, which continued the Star Wars parody into Empire Strikes Back territory, contains a callback to a line from the first parody episode that most viewers of the sequel would catch only if they specifically remembered the first. During Palpatine's appearance in the Empire Strikes Back material, he makes a reference to having figured out the key to Star Wars dialogue that was established as a joke in the previous installment. The callback is delivered quickly, without emphasis, as though it is simply the continuation of an ongoing conversation between the show and its audience. Finding it on a first viewing of the second movie requires the viewer to remember a specific throwaway line from the first one, which aired years earlier. Finding it creates a small, private experience of recognition that is only available to people who have been paying close enough attention for long enough to be let into the loop. The cutaway that shows Peter's knee injury and his extended reaction to it, which became one of the most discussed examples of the show's habit of stretching jokes past their natural endpoint, also contains a hidden detail that partly redeems its excessive length. During the extended sequence, which runs considerably longer than any comedy beat requires, specific background elements of the scene change between shots. The show is using the length of the gag not only as a commitment to the bit, but also as a cover for a visual game in the background, where objects are quietly replaced between cuts in ways that create a continuous but barely perceptible domestic chaos happening just out of frame. Most people who watch the knee injury sequence are watching Peter, but the sequence is also, simultaneously, showing a household in a state of gentle entropy happening all around him, plates moving from shelves to floor and back, a lamp gradually shifting position, a throw pillow migrating from one end of the couch to the other between shots. The foreground gag and the background game are running simultaneously, and only viewers who have already absorbed the foreground gag on previous viewings are in a position to start noticing what is happening behind it. Section 10. The fourth wall and what lives behind it. Meta references and hidden commentary. Family Guy has always had a complicated relationship with the barrier between itself and the audience, and nowhere is this more richly documented in hidden details than in the show's long history of self-referential moments and meta commentary. These moments come in many forms. Sometimes they are direct, characters acknowledging that they are in a television show. Sometimes they are structural, the show organizing itself in ways that comment on its own format or history. And sometimes they are hidden so deeply in background text or design choices that they exist almost as private notes from the creators to the tiny percentage of the audience paying close enough attention to find them. The Back to the Pilot episode from Season 10 is the most explicitly meta episode in the show's history, and also one of the most detailed sources of hidden connections to the show's own past. In this episode, Brian and Stewie use the time machine to travel back to the events of the very first episode of Family Guy, and the animators had to recreate the visual style of Season 1 within the framework of Season 10's substantially improved production quality. This presented an interesting challenge. How do you deliberately make animation look worse without it simply looking sloppy? The solution the team arrived at was to replicate the specific qualities of early season animation: the rougher outlines, the slightly different character proportions, the less consistent coloring, with enough precision that the result looks intentionally different rather than accidentally inferior. Achieving this required detailed reference work on the original episodes, and some of the choices made in recreating that early visual style contain small, deliberate anachronisms, elements that are slightly wrong for Season 1 but right for what Season 10 knew about how that era looked in retrospect. The episode also contains a moment, now legendary among fans of hidden details, where the characters in the recreated past observe themselves in the middle of a cutaway gag and notice that they have nothing to do while the gag plays. They simply stand there, with the awareness of characters in a show waiting for a break in the production, experiencing the structural reality of their own existence as televised fiction. It is played as a comedy beat, and it is one of the funniest moments in the episode. But it also says something genuine about the cutaway format and its effect on character. When a show cuts away from its main action to show something entirely unrelated, what happens to the characters the show has left behind? They wait. They stand in their mid-scene positions and wait for the camera to return to them. The episode makes this visible for a moment and then moves on, but the visibility is itself a kind of hidden truth about the mechanics of the show. The Season 4 episode Petitioned, where the family discovers that one of their photo albums has captured them at a moment in their history that does not quite match what the show has established, contains background text in the photo captions that has been extensively analyzed. The captions tell a version of the Griffin family history that is slightly different from the version established by other episodes, and fan theorists have argued that this represents either a deliberate alternate timeline reference or simply the show's perpetual willingness to let its internal history be flexible. The specific dates in those captions, readable only on paused high-resolution viewing, create a chronological puzzle that has no satisfying resolution within the show's established continuity, but whose very irresolvability is itself a statement about how the show treats its own past. The episode Road to the Pilot, not to be confused with Back to the Pilot, is a different kind of meta-episode that contains hidden self-referential details in its treatment of the show's continuity. In this episode, the show directly acknowledges that certain animation mistakes from its earlier years are canonical rather than errors, that they happened within the show's world and have to be accounted for rather than explained away. This is a radical piece of meta-honesty. The show telling its audience that the things they noticed were wrong are not just things they noticed, they are things that actually happened, and the characters lived through them. What looked like production errors were, within the fiction, real events. The episode plays this for laughs, but it is also a kind of absurdist commitment to the internal reality of the show's world that is more philosophically interesting than it appears on first viewing. The show's numerous direct references to The Simpsons, its most prominent animated competitor, and the show to which it has always been most frequently compared, contain hidden layers beyond the obvious jokes about the comparison. When characters on Family Guy are dismissive of The Simpsons, they are typically reflecting a specific moment in the competitive history of the two shows. A moment when Family Guy was newly returned from cancellation and was being measured constantly against Springfield's dominance. The dismissiveness in those jokes is not genuine contempt. It is the defensive posture of a show that genuinely respects its competitor, but is tired of being evaluated only in relation to it. Reading The Simpsons' dismissal gags with this awareness transforms them from simple competitive digs into something more like a shy person overcompensating for how much they admire someone they are supposed to be rivals with. The actual Family Guy and Simpsons crossover episode that aired in 2014 is dense with hidden details that reward knowledge of both shows' histories. Peter and Homer's fight, which takes place as a parody of the chicken fight format, features Homer throwing Emmy Awards at Peter. This specific choice of projectile is a reference to the Emmy nomination history of both shows. The Simpsons had won and been nominated for numerous Emmy Awards across its history. Family Guy had received one historic nomination for Outstanding Comedy Series in 2009, the first animated show since The Flintstones in 1961, to receive that distinction but had not won. Homer throwing Emmys and Peter being unable to retaliate with any is a hidden scorecard of the two shows' critical histories expressed through cartoon violence. The episode also contains a brief appearance by Roger from American Dad, who enters the scene and then immediately leaves, noting that he is no longer on Fox. This is a reference to the fact that American Dad had been moved from Fox to TBS before this crossover aired, meaning Roger technically exists on a different network from both Peter and Homer and therefore cannot fully participate in their universe. It is a piece of corporate media reality expressed as a character motivation, and it is delivered so quickly that most viewers have left the mental space of thinking about network affiliations by the time it happens. Section 11. The darkest details, hidden commentary in the show's most challenging moments. Not all of Family Guy's hidden details are cheerful. Some of the show's most embedded material lives in its darker and more challenging periods, in the episodes that tested the limits of what animation could say and how far a comedy could push before it stopped being comedy. And within these difficult episodes, the hidden details function differently from the Easter eggs embedded in lighter content. They are less like gifts and more like confessions, small acknowledgments of what the show was doing and why, placed where only the most attentive viewers would find them. The Seahorse Seashell Party episode, the season 10 episode in which Meg finally confronts her family about their treatment of her and then voluntarily resumes her role as the family's punching bag, contains hidden details in its staging and visual composition that suggest a more complex relationship to its own content than the surface-level action implies. In the sequence where Meg delivers her speech to her family, the camera angles and the blocking of the scene are more carefully constructed than a typical Family Guy confrontation scene. The composition changes between shots in ways that mirror the shifts in emotional power between the characters. When Meg is speaking truth to her family, the frame gives her more space. When the family begins to fracture without her as their shared target, the composition tightens and destabilizes. None of this is accompanied by any explicit commentary. It is visual storytelling doing work beneath the surface of the dialogue. The episode Peter's Sister, which attempts to explain Peter's cruelty toward Meg by connecting it to his own history of being bullied by his sister, is the only episode in the show's run where Peter and Meg genuinely reconcile in a way that is not immediately reversed. And hidden within this episode, in a background detail during the reconciliation scene, is a small visual element that distinguishes this moment from similar moments in other episodes. The specific framing of Peter and Meg in this scene, the physical distance between them, and how it closes during their conversation, mirrors almost exactly the framing used in a Season 2 episode, where Peter and Meg had a genuinely warm moment that has been largely forgotten in the context of the later season's treatment of their relationship. Whether this mirror framing was deliberate, whether someone went back to that Season 2 episode and used it as a reference for this one, cannot be confirmed. But the resemblance is close enough to feel intentional, and if it is intentional, it suggests that this episode was designed as a return to something that had been lost, a visual callback to a time when the father and daughter in this family had something real between them. Brian's death in the Season 12 episode Life of Brian and his resurrection 2 episodes later in Christmas Guy is surrounded by hidden details that partly redeem the experience from being a purely commercial manipulation. In Life of Brian, in the moments after Brian is hit by the car, the family's reactions are animated with unusual specificity and care. Each family member's response to Brian's injury is consistent with their established characterization in ways that the show does not always bother to maintain. Peter's response is specifically the response of someone who cannot process what he is seeing and so defaults to ineffective action. Stewie's response is the response of someone experiencing their first encounter with the irreversibility of loss. These specific emotional notes are embedded in the animation rather than in the dialogue, present in body language and facial expression rather than words, and they give the sequence a quality of genuine feeling that the eventual resurrection might seem to negate but does not entirely erase. The Christmas Guy episode, in which Stewie uses a time travel device he steals from a past version of himself to prevent Brian's death, contains a hidden detail in the mechanics of the time travel that is consistent with the rules the show had established for Stewie's time machine across previous episodes. Most time travel stories get sloppy about their own rules. Family Guy, of all shows, actually tracked them in this instance. The specific behavior of the time machine in Christmas Guy, the way it interacts with the timeline and the consequences it creates for the version of Stewie who uses it, is consistent with how the device has behaved in other episodes that featured it. Someone checked. Someone went back to the time travel episodes and made sure that the rules being applied in Christmas Guy were the same rules that had been established before. This is the kind of work that the show's reputation for not caring about continuity would lead you to assume had never been done, which is precisely what makes finding it feel so significant. The Brian and Stewie episode, which has been discussed earlier in terms of its animation but deserves mention in this section for a different kind of hidden detail, contains a sequence in which Brian reveals that he has kept a gun in his safety deposit box because he has considered ending his own life. This is among the most dramatic and emotionally direct moments in the show's entire history. And hidden within it, in the specific objects visible in the safety deposit box and in the specific way the box is arranged when Brian opens it, is a detail that suggests this is not the first time Brian has opened this box to look at the gun. The arrangement of items in the box has the quality of something that has been accessed and then carefully restored to its original configuration multiple times. The gun is not buried under other things. It is easily accessible. Someone thought about what kind of relationship Brian has with this box and built that relationship into how its contents are arranged. Section 12. The rarest Easter eggs discoveries that took decades to find. The longest hidden Easter eggs in Family Guy are the ones that required the confluence of several factors before they could be discovered. High-definition remastering of older episodes, streaming services that allowed precise pause and frame-advance viewing, online communities of fans who shared their discoveries and built on each other's findings, and the simple passage of enough time that even the most minor background details had been subjected to the sustained attention they needed to yield their secrets. The Luke Perry TV guide detail, discussed earlier, exemplifies this category. In real-time broadcast on a standard-definition television in the early 2000s, the text under Luke Perry's photograph in the magazine Peter Holds Up is completely illegible. The image is too small and the resolution too low. But on DVD and later on streaming services with the ability to pause and zoom, that text becomes readable. If you can read this, Family Guy is on the air. The joke could not exist before the technology for finding it existed. It was created in anticipation of a future viewer experience that would not be available for years. A similar structure underlies the discovery of specific text hidden in the book, covers visible on shelves in Brian's apartment. These books have been present in every season of the show, visible in background shots of Brian's personal space. But it was not until the combination of high-definition streaming and dedicated fan communities cataloging background details that their specific titles were identified. Some of them are exactly what you would expect. Literary fiction of the kind a self-consciously intellectual character would display. But several of them are more surprising, revealing aspects of Brian's reading life that his dialogue and on-screen behavior do not explicitly acknowledge. One shelf visible in a specific episode from the 8th season contains a collection of books on the history of jazz music, a subject that connects Brian directly to Seth MacFarlane's own documented musical obsessions. The books are not mentioned. They are not plot relevant. They are simply there, suggesting that Brian's interest in music runs deeper than the wine and cocktail culture that characterizes his more visible tastes. The discovery of text hidden in the tattoos visible on a background character who appears in several bar scenes across the show's middle seasons required an extraordinary degree of dedication from the fan who found it. This background character, who is never named in the show, has sleeve tattoos on both arms that are visible in brief background shots during scenes set in the Drunken Clam. For most of the show's run, these tattoos were simply colored patterns that filled the visual space of the character's arms without communicating any specific information. but a fan who noticed that the pattern had more structure than random decoration spent considerable time collecting freeze frames from every episode in which the character appeared, eventually assembling enough high-resolution frames to piece together the complete text hidden in the tattoo's design. The text turned out to be a quote from a Rat Pack-era song that Seth MacFarlane has publicly expressed admiration for, hidden in the skin of a background character who appears in maybe 20 frames across several dozen episodes. The discovery that certain pieces of music used in background scenes during specific episodes contain hidden musical references audible only when the tracks are isolated from the ambient sound design and listened to separately is one of the most technically demanding kinds of Easter egg hunting the show has produced. The show's music department, particularly in the early seasons under Ron Jones's direction, constructed scores with a layered complexity that was largely inaudible in the context of scenes also containing dialogue and sound effects. When fans with digital audio tools began extracting and isolating the musical tracks from DVDs and streaming versions of episodes, they found that certain transitional cues and background pieces contained musical quotations from other sources that were entirely hidden by the ambient context of the scenes they accompanied. These musical Easter eggs are genuinely invisible in ordinary viewing conditions. They require a kind of forensic listening that was not possible before the technology to isolate individual audio tracks became widely available. One of the most moving discoveries in this category came from an episode in the show's later seasons that appeared on first viewing to be an unremarkable installment in the show's ongoing decline. A fan watching the episode with isolated audio noticed that the underscore during a brief and apparently throwaway scene between Peter and Meg contained a musical theme that had appeared, buried in the score, in the very first episode of the series during a scene of genuine familial warmth. The same theme, played in a similar arrangement, in a later episode during a moment when Peter and Meg were behaving the way the show had trained them to behave in its post-revival period. The comparison between the two contexts, the original scene where the theme made emotional sense and the later scene where it was a ghost of something that used to be there, is the most achingly melancholy thing the show has ever done accidentally or perhaps deliberately. No one associated with the show has confirmed whether the musical callback was intentional, but its presence is documented, verifiable, and available to anyone willing to do the technical work of listening. The show's DVD releases contain their own category of Easter eggs separate from anything visible in the episodes themselves. The Blue Harvest DVD, for instance, contains a hidden segment accessible through a specific navigation path that shows footage from the early table read for the follow-up episode Something 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 Dark Side. Finding it requires navigating through a specific menu path, going to the Features section, selecting North by North Quahog from a list, and then pressing the right arrow button to highlight a set of bubbles that become visible. Pressing Enter accesses the hidden content. This is a genuine DVD Easter egg in the original sense of the term. Content hidden in the navigation architecture of a disc that can only be accessed by people who know the specific path to find it. The fact that this path was publicly documented in the fan community means it is findable by anyone who has heard about it, but the original design intention was that it would only be discovered through determined exploration of the DVD's menus. The show's connection to Seth MacFarlane's own near-miss with history on September 11th has generated one of the most extensively analyzed hidden details in any episode of the series. When the cutaway gag referenced earlier, the one about surviving a disaster by being late because of a football game, is examined frame by frame. It contains visual staging choices that do not quite match the tone of an ordinary comedic cutaway. The timing of the gag is fractionally different from comparable cutaways in the same episode. The frame stays on the aftermath beat just slightly longer than the comedy of the moment requires. These are extremely subtle observations that require calibration against many other cutaways to make, but the consensus in the fan community that has analyzed this specific gag is that its construction has a different quality from the surrounding material, as though the emotional weight of what it references inflected the production even in an episode that treats almost everything else with equal lightness. The discovery that the opening credit sequence contains portraits of Stewie, Meg, and Chris in the background, photographs that were not present in the earliest episodes, discussed at the beginning of this journey, is actually only one layer of what fans discovered when they began examining the opening credits with high-resolution tools across multiple seasons. The backgrounds of those photographs, visible in the most recent high-definition versions of the opening, contain additional detail that was never present in earlier seasons. There are locations recognizable from specific episodes visible through the windows behind the Griffin family portraits. There are small objects in the backgrounds of these paintings that correspond to specific objects that appear in the show's internal world. The photographs are not just updated versions of indistinct background rectangles. They are fully realized miniature scenes from within the show's universe, compressed to the scale of wall art but containing, at the level of magnification made possible by current screen technology, a density of specific visual information that suggests they were drawn with the full detail of episode scenes rather than simply as background decoration. And perhaps the most extraordinary hidden Easter egg in the show's entire history is the one that most completely exemplifies what this kind of attention to hidden detail makes possible. Across several episodes from the middle seasons, there is a very specific background element visible in exterior shots of the Griffin house from a particular angle. It is a small piece of writing on the mailbox post, barely visible and requiring specific lighting conditions in specific exterior shots to make out at all. Fans who found it, working from high-resolution screenshots of multiple episodes and comparing them carefully, were able to establish that the same text was present across different seasons, unchanged, in this very small and very specific location. The text, once readable, is a line from a particular song that Seth MacFarlane has cited as personally significant in interviews given over the years. It is not a joke. It is not a reference to a pop culture touchstone. It is simply a line from a piece of music that a young animator from Rhode Island loved deeply, inscribed in the smallest possible form on the most domestically central object in the show he built, where it would be invisible to everyone who was not specifically looking. It is still there. In every episode where that angle of the mailbox appears, in every season, across every iteration of the show's animation style and its shifting visual standards, that small inscription remains. Whatever else changed about Family Guy over more than 2 decades of production, that tiny piece of the creator's private self, hidden on a mailbox post in an animated suburb of Rhode Island, never moved. Section 13. The supporting cast's secret histories: Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe. Glenn Quagmire is, on the surface, one of the most self-explanatory characters in the show's main cast. His defining characteristics are established early and maintained consistently, and the show has generally not tried to complicate or add depth to the simplicity of what he represents. And yet the accumulated detail work that the production team has applied to Quagmire across 20-plus seasons constitutes a hidden biography of considerable richness, if you know where to look for it. Quagmire's house, which sits next door to the Griffin house and appears constantly in establishing shots and neighborhood scenes, has a design detail that is rarely mentioned in analysis of the show, but becomes genuinely fascinating when you look for it. The house was clearly built at the same time as the Griffin house, and to a very similar plan, but Quagmire's modifications and personal touches over the years of his occupation have diverged from the Griffin house's more standard domestic appearance in ways that say quite a lot about their respective inhabitants. The Griffin house looks like what it is: a working-class family home, maintained but not elaborated upon, with the specific practical accommodations and small aesthetic choices that accumulate over years of ordinary family life. Quagmire's house, when examined across multiple episodes, shows signs of renovation and personal customization that are not immediately obvious but that reveal specific priorities. Certain windows are larger than the original house plan would have had them. Certain exterior elements have been updated in ways that suggest both money spent and very specific aesthetic goals. The house has been adapted by someone who had clear ideas about what he wanted his domestic environment to communicate and the resources to pursue those ideas. Cleveland's slow-motion bathtub exit, which has been discussed in other contexts, deserves additional attention for what it reveals about the hidden design work in the show's visual gags. The bathtub itself has been rendered consistently enough across its multiple appearances that fans have been able to trace its design from a specific era of American bathroom fixture manufacturing. It is a clawfoot tub of a type that was common in working-class American homes from the 1950s through the 1970s. And its presence in Cleveland's second-floor bathroom suggests something about when that bathroom was last renovated and about the economic circumstances of the renovation. Like the orange cabinets in the Griffin kitchen, it is a piece of domestic archaeology rendered as background detail, saying something real about the lives of the people it belongs to. Joe Swanson's wheelchair, which has been present in every episode of the show since his first appearance, is designed with a specificity that rewards close examination. It is not a generic animated wheelchair. It is based on a real model that was in wide use at the time the show began. And across the seasons, as the design of real wheelchairs has evolved, the version depicted in the show has been quietly updated to remain consistent with contemporary equivalents of the original type. This is a remarkably subtle and consistent commitment to a background detail in a show that is often celebrated for caring very little about such things. Someone in the art department was tracking real wheelchair design across more than 2 decades and making small adjustments to Joe's chair to keep pace with it. The specific injury that put Joe in the wheelchair, which has been explained and then re-explained in contradictory ways across different episodes, is itself a piece of hidden information about the show's relationship to its own history. In one episode, it is an injury sustained during a heroic police action. In another episode, it is explained differently. The show eventually acknowledged these contradictions directly, with a character noting that the story of how Joe was injured keeps changing. But the contradictions themselves, and the show's willingness to let them stand rather than resolving them into a single canonical version, is a piece of meta-commentary about the nature of personal mythology. Joe's injury story is whatever the episode needs it to be, and the accumulation of different versions creates a portrait of a character whose defining trauma has been so fully incorporated into who he is that the specific facts of it have become secondary to what it represents. The injury is not a piece of information. It is part of Joe's identity, and identities are not stories with fixed plots. Section 14. The music within the music. Walter Murphy and the sound of Spooner Street. The music of Family Guy is one of the show's most completely hidden Easter egg environments. Most viewers experience the music as background, and that is precisely the position from which it does its most interesting work. The composers who have worked on the show, primarily Ron Jones in the early seasons and Walter Murphy across the show's longer run, approach the scoring of a cartoon comedy as an opportunity to embed musical jokes and references that would be accessible only to viewers with significant musical knowledge and completely invisible to everyone else. Walter Murphy, whose name appears in the end credits of most Family Guy episodes he scored, and who is name-checked in the Brian Does Hollywood episode as a nominee for Best Original Score in an Adult Film, has constructed a musical world for the show that operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The surface level is functional comedy scoring, cues that punctuate jokes, transition between scenes, and generally support the comedic tone without drawing attention to themselves. But beneath this functional layer is a continuous stream of musical quotation, allusion, and hidden reference that constitutes one of the longest-running Easter egg traditions in the show's history. One of the most famous musical Easter eggs attributed to Murphy involves the use of specific harmonic progressions at moments in the show that carry particular emotional weight. These progressions are borrowed from pieces of music that have strong cultural associations, and their appearance at specific moments in the show creates a subtle emotional double exposure, the feeling of the original piece of music superimposed on the scene being scored. Most viewers feel the effect without being able to name its source. The scene feels sadder or more romantic or more triumphant than it would if it were scored with original material, because the underlying music is carrying its own established emotional memory. The theme music for the show itself, composed by Walter Murphy and McFarlane with lyrics by McFarlane, is a piece of Broadway-style musical pastiche that references a very specific tradition of American entertainment. The harmonic language is not generic Broadway. It is specifically the language of the mid-century American musical, the sound of Broadway in the 1950s and 1960s, a period that McFarlane has cited repeatedly as a personal musical touchstone. Playing the theme with that knowledge does not change what you hear in any dramatic way. The melody is what it is, but it adds a layer of context that enriches the experience of the opening credits, making them not just a catchy theme song, but a very specific kind of love letter to a very specific period in American entertainment history. The music used during the chicken fights is a category all to itself. The fights are scored with orchestral action music that draws from the tradition of Hollywood adventure film scoring, but within this broadly conventional format, specific musical choices mark each fight as belonging to a particular moment in the tradition. The first fight from Season 2 is scored with music that references the action cliches of the late 1990s. Each subsequent fight's music reflects a slightly updated version of the same language, subtly evolving to track with changes in how Hollywood scores action sequences. If you watch all the chicken fights in sequence and pay attention primarily to the music, you can hear a compressed history of action film scoring from the late 1990s through the mid-2010s, embedded in the accompaniment to a recurring joke about a man fighting a chicken. The Conway Twitty appearances that became one of the show's most notorious recurring gags are also, from a musical perspective, more interesting than their notorious reputation suggests. The choice of Conway Twitty specifically, and not any other country artist, was not random. Twitty was a figure who occupied a very specific cultural position in American music. Enormously successful within his genre, but essentially invisible outside it, beloved by an audience that has never overlapped with the typical Family Guy demographic. Using his music as filler was a joke about cultural distance, about the gap between what the show's audience knew and what a specific slice of American musical culture contained. The joke is mean in the way it uses Twitty's genuine art as material for mockery, but it is also, in its very specific choice of artist, more precisely targeted than a simple random country song would have been. Someone who knew Conway Twitty chose him specifically, and the choice carries more information about that person's cultural awareness than the joke itself reveals. Section 15. The Long View. What 3 decades of Easter eggs tell us? Standing back from the individual details and looking at the whole of Family Guy's hidden world, what you see is not just a collection of Easter eggs but a self-portrait. The show hid things that mattered to the people who made it. References to the music they loved, the films they had watched obsessively, the television they grew up on, the personal histories they carried into work with them every day. The Rhode Island geography embedded in the backgrounds. The Rat Pack lyrics inscribed on the mailbox. The student film characters who became the show's central figures. The professional history compressed into a fictional television show that Peter's favorite character would fight to bring back. All of it, taken together, describes the specific sensibility of a creator who cared deeply about entertainment history, about comedy as a discipline with a lineage, about the specific pleasures of a kind of cultural knowledge that takes years to accumulate. The Easter eggs also document the show's creative evolution in ways that the surface content does not. In the early seasons, when MacFarlane was closely involved and the writing team was small and cohesive, the hidden details tend to be personal and specific. They reference his education, his musical taste, his professional biography. They feel like the work of someone reaching into his own experience and putting it into the show wherever it would fit. As the seasons progress and the writing room expands and MacFarlane's involvement becomes more supervisory, the hidden details change character. They become more community-oriented, more collaborative, more focused on shared references from the writer's room as a whole, rather than from any single creator's particular history. By the later seasons, the Easter eggs are partly nostalgic in character, references back to earlier moments in the show's own history, callbacks to things that happened in Season 2 that are being quietly acknowledged in Season 14. The show is building its own internal mythology and using hidden details as one of the ways it documents and honors that mythology. This is different from the original impulse, which was to use hidden details as windows into the creator's mind, but it is not lesser. It is the natural evolution of a creative work that has lived long enough to have a history worth honoring. The relationship between the hidden details and the audience is itself one of the most interesting things that these Easter eggs document. The show began hiding things long before there was any reliable way for viewers to find them. The early DVD Easter eggs and the hidden newspaper text and the background inscriptions were created in the knowledge that only a very small number of people would ever discover them. That original audience of seekers was tiny and necessarily devoted. They were people who bought DVDs and paused them and paid attention to things that no normal viewing behavior would reveal. But the audience for hidden details expanded enormously with streaming. When high-definition versions of every episode became available and shareable on platforms that allowed precise frame-by-frame navigation, the community of seekers grew dramatically. Discoveries that might have taken years to circulate through small online forums began spreading within hours of being found. The hidden world of Family Guy became, for the first time, genuinely accessible to the broad population of dedicated fans who wanted to find it. And what those fans found when they looked was that the show had been talking to them all along. Every hidden detail is a communication, placed by someone who cared about the craft enough to put things there that most people would never see, trusting that the few people who did look would understand what they had found. That trust, between creator and the most attentive members of the audience, is one of the most intimate relationships that a long-running television show can develop. It does not require ratings. It does not require critical recognition. It simply requires that the people making the show care enough to leave something behind for the people who are paying close enough attention to find it. Family Guy has been doing this for over 25 years. In every season, in every episode, behind every joke and beside every cutaway and beneath every throwaway gag, there are things waiting to be found. Some of them have been found by now. Some of them are still waiting. The house at 31 Spooner Street holds more secrets than any single viewing can exhaust, and the world behind its red door is deeper than it has ever needed to appear. Every time you watch, there is something new. That is not an accident. It is the point. And with that, we have reached the end of this particular journey through the hidden world of Family Guy. 3 hours of Easter eggs, of background details, of buried text and hidden music, and architectural impossibilities, and creator confessions and small quiet gifts left in the margins of a show that has been called many things across its long life, but whose commitment to hiding beautiful things for the right people to find has never wavered. If you have been listening to this from somewhere peaceful, somewhere quiet, and something in these details has settled you down a little, has given your mind something gentle to hold while the night passes, then this was exactly what it was supposed to be. Drop a comment below and tell me your favorite hidden detail from the show. Tell me what you already knew and what surprised you. Tell me what you are going to go look for next time you sit down with an episode. And if you are not already subscribed, please do that now. It takes one moment, it costs nothing, and it means you will be here when we do this again, because there are more hidden worlds to explore. There are always more hidden worlds to explore. Thank you for watching. Sleep well. End of script. Section 16. Brian Does Hollywood and the Music Industry Hidden Cameos. The Season 2 episode Brian Does Hollywood is one of the earliest examples of the show, hiding real people inside jokes that appear to be entirely fictional. The episode follows Brian as he travels to Los Angeles to pursue a screenwriting career and ends up working in adult films. But the moment that rewards the most careful attention comes near the episode's end during an awards ceremony. In this sequence, a character presenting an award for Best Original Score in an adult film reads out a list of nominees that includes Ron Jones, Walter Murphy, and John Williams. Ron Jones was the primary composer for Family Guy's first 4 seasons before being replaced. Walter Murphy is the composer who took over from Jones and has scored the vast majority of the show's episodes since. These two men, both genuinely significant figures in the show's musical identity, are placed as nominees for an adult film award in an episode that otherwise has nothing to do with the actual music production of the show. And the 4th nominee is John Williams, the composer responsible for the Star Wars scores, the Jurassic Park theme, and virtually every significant Hollywood blockbuster score from the 1970s onward. The joke of Williams being nominated for an adult film score is funny on its own terms. But it is specifically funnier if you know that the other nominees on the list are the actual composers of the television show you are watching, because their presence transforms the joke from a generic celebrity gag into something more specifically self-referential. You are essentially watching the show nominate its own composers for an adult film award, while also nominating the most respected film composer in Hollywood, creating a comparison that is absurd specifically because of how much context it requires to fully appreciate. The Wilhelm scream appears multiple times across Family Guy episodes in ways that are designed to be caught by people who know what it is and to be completely invisible to people who do not. The Wilhelm scream is a specific recorded human voice, making a specific yelping sound that was first used in a 1951 Western film and has since appeared in hundreds of movies and television shows, becoming a beloved inside joke among sound designers. Family Guy has used it in scenes of physical comedy and crowd chaos throughout its run, always in contexts where it would blend naturally into the background sound. For most viewers, it is simply part of the ambient audio environment. For people who recognize it, its presence is a small, cheerful acknowledgement from the show's sound design team. We know the history of film sound, and we are choosing to participate in it. Section 17. Kubrick in the background film references hiding in plain sight. Stanley Kubrick's work is particularly thoroughly woven into the show's visual fabric. The Shining connection is perhaps the most extensively documented. In certain Halloween episodes and in corridor scenes within the Griffin House, specific visual compositions mirror iconic shots from The Shining in ways that go beyond simple parody. The use of symmetrical corridor compositions in certain hallway scenes echoes the specific visual grammar that Kubrick used throughout the Overlook Hotel sequences. These are absorbed influences, the visual vocabulary of Kubrick's approach to institutional space, finding its way into the domestic spaces of a suburban family's home. The connection is visible if you have The Shining in your visual memory, and completely invisible if you do not. The word redrum has appeared in Family Guy episodes multiple times across different seasons. Sometimes its appearance is part of an explicit Shining reference, but in other cases, redrum appears in background signage or text at moments when no obvious Shining reference is being made in the foreground, creating a subliminal echo of Kubrick's film in a scene about something entirely different. Fans who have collected instances of redrum appearing in the show have documented appearances across at least 6 different seasons, suggesting that this specific visual element has become something like a private signature embedded by specific people in the writing room or art department. Jesus' license plate in the North by North Quahog episode reads WWID rather than the standard WWJD that appeared on bracelets and bumper stickers across American evangelical popular culture in the early 2000s. The show took this specific cultural artifact and modified it by one letter, changing "What would Jesus do" to "What would I do," placing it on the license plate of a car being driven by Jesus himself within the fiction. The joke is complete in one letter's difference, but only funny if you know what WWJD stands for and can immediately process the substitution. It is a joke specifically for people who were paying attention to American religious culture at a specific moment in time, embedded in the background of a driving scene where the license plate is visible for less than 3 seconds. The planes, trains, and automobiles connection is one of the show's more affectionate pieces of film homage. A speech from John Hughes's 1987 film appears in a Family Guy episode in a form close enough to be recognizable, but different enough to avoid copyright concerns. The speech is about the social contract involved in encountering a difficult stranger. In the original film, it is one of the most cathartic moments of a deeply felt comedy. In Family Guy, its appearance in a new context uses that established emotional resonance for its own distinct comedic purpose. Viewers who catch the reference get a doubled experience, the Family Guy joke as written and the original speech playing in their memory simultaneously. Section 18. Lois's Facebook and the Digital Age Details. One of the most unexpectedly poignant hidden details in the show's entire run is visible in an episode where Lois is shown using Facebook on her laptop. In the scene, the laptop screen is visible for a moment, and if you pause on it, you can see Lois's Facebook profile with its notifications. Among the pending friend requests visible on her screen is one from Meg. Meg has sent her mother a Facebook friend request, and Lois has not accepted it. This is a piece of background information that takes exactly 2 seconds to absorb, and that most people watching the episode at normal speed would never register. But sitting with it for a moment produces something that the show's explicit content rarely generates: a genuine small feeling. Here is a teenager who wants to be connected to her mother through the most ordinary social medium of the era, and here is that mother who has simply not gotten around to accepting the request. It is not dramatic. There is no scene about it. No character comments on it. It is simply visible, quietly, in the background of a scene where the ostensible subject is something else. And it says something about the Griffin family's specific emotional dynamics that nothing in the episode's main plot addresses. The technology visible in the Griffin household tracked with real-world changes in domestic technology across the show's run in ways that are easy to overlook but create a precise timeline if collected and compared. The television sets visible in the living room across different seasons reflect the transition from cathode ray tube screens to flat panel displays that happened in American living rooms during the 2000s. The computers visible in the household move from boxy desktop models to laptops and eventually to tablets. The phones in characters' hands evolve from cordless landlines to early mobile phones to smartphones. None of these changes are commented on by any character. They simply happen, tracking the technological transformation of American domestic life with a specificity that suggests the art department was paying attention to the world outside the show. Section 19. The Adam West Dimension. Adam West, who served as the mayor of the show's town until his death in 2017, is a source of hidden details that require knowledge of his broader career to fully appreciate. West is best known for his portrayal of Batman in the 1966 television series, and the show built a sophisticated relationship with this legacy across Mayor West's many appearances. Beneath the obvious Batman references in Mayor West's dialogue is a more subtle layer of acknowledgement living in the staging and composition of his scenes. West's physical posturing as Mayor West, the specific way he holds himself and uses his voice, periodically invokes the very particular performance style he developed for the 1966 Batman. The camp confidence of that character's physical presence, the deliberate theatricality of its self-presentation, the sense of a person who occupies any space as though they have been placed there for maximum visual impact, all of these qualities migrate from Batman to Mayor West in ways that are funny if you simply experience Mayor West as an eccentric public official, and additionally, funny if you recognize them as quotations from a specific earlier performance. In at least one Halloween episode, West appears as Catman rather than Batman, referencing a character West actually voiced in the animated series The Fairly OddParents. Most viewers experience this as a random costume choice, but it is a specific reference to another role in West's career that only people with knowledge of that career could access. The show is acknowledging West's full body of work with a specificity that most of its audience could not reach, hiding this acknowledgement inside a costume gag. Section 20. The episode title, Secret Language. The episode titles of Family Guy are themselves a category of hidden detail that most viewers engage with passively. Episode titles appear on streaming services and DVD menus, but are not shown on screen during the episodes themselves, which means many viewers only encounter them in context removed from the viewing experience. This relative invisibility has made the titles a space where the show has embedded private jokes with less expectation of wide discovery than almost anything in the episode content. The Road to episodes, which feature Brian and Stewie on various adventures, have titles that specifically reference the road to films starring Bing Crosby and Bob Hope from the 1940s and 1950s. Road to Singapore, Road to Morocco, Road to Rio, and the others in that series are a very specific cultural reference completely opaque to viewers unaware of those films. The Family Guy writing team chose to base their most beloved episode subgenre on a parody of a film franchise that most of their audience had never seen, embedding this reference in the titles themselves. For viewers who know the Hope and Crosby films, the Brian and Stewie road trip episodes carry an additional layer of comedic relationship to their sources that makes specific choices of tone and adventure story structure more legible as parody. The episode Petarded takes a word that functions as a taboo insult in American English and uses it as a title that is simultaneously the show's most reductive possible description of its own protagonist and a meta-commentary on the show's willingness to use language that other programs would avoid. But the deeper layer of this title is in what it reveals about the episode's own relationship to its content. Naming an episode about intellectual disability with the most casual and dismissive version of that concept creates a tension between the title's flippancy and the episode's more complicated content that is only visible when you step back and consider the title separately from the episode. Section 21. The Supporting Cast Secret Histories. Joe Swanson's wheelchair, which has been present in every episode since his first appearance, is designed with a specificity that rewards close examination. It is not a generic animated wheelchair. It is based on a real model that was in wide use at the time the show began, and across the seasons, as the design of real wheelchairs has evolved, the version depicted in the show has been quietly updated to remain consistent with contemporary equivalents of the original type. This is a remarkably subtle commitment to a background detail in a show often celebrated for caring very little about such things. Someone in the art department was tracking real wheelchair design across more than 2 decades and making small adjustments to Joe's chair to keep pace with it. The specific injury that put Joe in the wheelchair has been explained and then re-explained in contradictory ways across different episodes. In one episode, it is an injury sustained during a heroic police action involving the Grinch, who terrorized children one winter. In another episode, it is explained differently. The show eventually acknowledged these contradictions directly with a character noting that the story of how Joe was injured keeps changing. But the contradictions themselves, rather than being errors, function as a piece of meta-commentary about the nature of personal mythology. Joe's injury story is whatever the episode needs it to be, and the accumulation of different versions creates a portrait of a character whose defining event has been so fully incorporated into who he is that the specific facts of it have become secondary to what it represents. Glenn Quagmire's known age, established in the show as significantly older than Peter and the other friends in their social circle, transforms several of his interactions if you hold it in mind while watching. He is an older man maintaining the behavioral patterns of someone considerably younger, which is either a comment on arrested development or on the specific social culture of his naval aviation background, where extreme behavior was understood as a pressure valve rather than a character flaw. The specific number the show gives for his age, combined with other established biographical details about his history, creates a timeline for his life that fans have mapped out and found to be reasonably consistent across episodes, suggesting that someone was tracking these details rather than generating them randomly. Cleveland's slow-motion bathtub exit, which has been discussed in other contexts, deserves attention for what it reveals about the hidden design work in the show's visual gags. The bathtub has been rendered consistently enough across its multiple appearances that fans have been able to trace its design from a specific era of American bathroom fixture manufacturing. It is a clawfoot tub of a type common in working-class American homes from the 1950s through the 1970s, and its presence in Cleveland's second-floor bathroom suggests something about when that bathroom was last renovated. Like the orange cabinets in the Griffin kitchen, it is a piece of domestic archaeology rendered as background detail, saying something real about the economic circumstances of the people it belongs to. Section 22. Voice acting and what the performances hide. Seth MacFarlane voices 4 of the show's main characters: Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire. The achievement is partly obscured by the distinctiveness of each voice. Peter sounds nothing like Brian, who sounds nothing like Stewie, who sounds nothing like Quagmire. But when you listen to all 4 performances across extended episodes and attend to qualities that persist across the different character voices, you start to hear specific elements of MacFarlane's own voice and sensibility embedded in all 4 characters, weighted differently in each case. Peter's voice is MacFarlane pushing into a higher register with a specific Rhode Island working-class quality developed through research and practice. Brian's voice is MacFarlane at something much closer to his actual speaking register. The dry, slightly detached quality of the performance being one of the things that makes Brian feel like the most autobiographical of his 4 characters. Stewie's British accent is a trained affectation, but the specific theatrical quality of his delivery, the way he constructs sentences for maximum rhetorical effect, reflects MacFarlane's deep love of theatrical vocal tradition. Quagmire's voice is built on a specific model of 1950s American masculinity performance that MacFarlane has cited as intentional. Alex Borstein, who voices Lois, built the character's voice on a specific real-world impression rather than a constructed character voice. The specific phonetic choices she makes, the way certain vowels are placed and certain consonants weighted, are consistent with a very particular regional and social background that is more precisely located than it might appear on first listening. Finding the real person's voice inside Lois's performance is not possible for someone who does not know who the original model was. But knowing that the model exists and listening for the precision of execution that comes from a performance built on close observation of a real voice adds a dimension to Lois that her dialogue alone does not provide. The replacement of Lacey Chabert by Mila Kunis as the voice of Meg after the first season is one of the show's most discussed casting changes. Less discussed is the degree to which Kunis's performance incorporates and extends the vocal characterization that Chabert established. The 2 performances are not identical, but the transition between them is smoother than many viewers realize, partly because the character of Meg was deliberately underwritten enough in the first season that there was not a strongly established vocal personality for Kunis to either match or deliberately depart from. She stepped into a relatively open characterization and gradually filled it with something that became the only version most viewers know. The specific voice that Seth Green developed for Chris Griffin, based on the unexpected impression he performed during his audition, is a hidden piece of performance history embedded in every line the character speaks. What you are hearing when Chris Griffin talks is the echo of a specific audition moment, a beat of professional daring where Green did something entirely unexpected and found that it worked. The voice is clearly Chris Griffin, recognizable and consistent and characterful in its own right. But knowing its origin changes how you listen to the character, adding a layer of history to something that sounds entirely natural. Section 23. The Evil Monkey and Background Character Lore. Chris Griffin's bedroom contains one of the show's most enduringly mysterious recurring presences, the evil monkey who lives in his closet. The evil monkey first appeared in an episode during the second season and became one of the show's most beloved running gags, though it operates with an unusual structure. The evil monkey points at Chris from inside the closet. Chris is terrified. Nobody else in the family believes Chris when he describes the monkey. This cycle repeats across many episodes without resolution or acknowledgement from any other character. The evil monkey has a hidden dimension that the show eventually revealed in the Season 8 episode Hannah Banana, where it is disclosed that the monkey had a tragic backstory explaining his apparent malevolence. He was once a happy monkey with a wife and a suburban existence, and his apparent evil was actually grief and bitterness responding to his wife's infidelity. This backstory does not eliminate the horror of the original gag, but transforms it retroactively, revealing that what Chris had interpreted as supernatural threat was actually the brooding of a deeply sad primate who ended up in a child's closet in Rhode Island. What makes this revelation particularly interesting is that the evil monkey's apparently menacing gesture, the pointing, is never explicitly decoded within the narrative. He points. Chris is terrified. But what does the gesture mean? Is he pointing to get Chris's attention? Is he warning Chris about something? Is the gesture aggressive or communicative? The show has never definitively answered this question, which means the pointing remains available to interpretation across every appearance. The Blue Harvest Bar cameo that included the evil monkey alongside Bender from Futurama and Roger from American Dad placed him in a context that illuminates his status within the broader animated television world. He appears not as an appendage to Chris's storyline, but as a citizen of animated television, belonging to the broader community of cartoon figures with enough character identity to justify being recognized by name in a crowded fictional space. In that bar in a galaxy far, far away, the evil monkey occupies a bar stool and exists completely on his own terms. Section 24. 30 Seasons of Small Miracles. Standing at the end of this long journey through the hidden world of Family Guy, it is worth spending time thinking about what this ecosystem of Easter eggs actually is, and what it means that it exists at all. An Easter egg, in the entertainment sense, is a piece of hidden content placed by creators for discovery by viewers who are paying a particular kind of attention. The practice predates television animation by decades. Alfred Hitchcock used to embed himself in brief appearances in his own films, a form of director's signature that required no announcement because the appearance was always in a marginal position, demanding specific viewer knowledge to identify. The tradition expanded enormously in the streaming era, where the ability to pause and rewind has made previously impossible discoveries routine. But Family Guy's Easter egg tradition has its roots in a pre-streaming moment, in an era when hiding things required trusting that the right people would eventually have the right tools to find them. When McFarlane and his team put text under a Luke Perry photo that said, "If you can read this, Family Guy is on the air," they were trusting that someone, somewhere, would eventually be watching closely enough to read it. When the animators drew a specific Providence building into a background, they were trusting that someone who had walked that same street would recognize it. When the music department buried a musical quotation in the underscore of a scene, they were trusting that someone with both the technical tools and the musical knowledge to extract and identify it would eventually do so. This is a generous creative practice. It requires genuine commitment to producing content that may never be noticed, that exists not because it will serve any measurable metric, but because it is good to put things in the world even when nobody is looking. The Easter eggs of Family Guy are, in this sense, evidence of something important about the show's creative culture at its best, a belief that craftsmanship has value independent of visibility, that the detail you put into a background that nobody sees still makes the background better, still makes the world of the show more real and more alive, even for viewers who never consciously register the specific element making it so. The community that has grown up around discovering and documenting these Easter eggs is itself remarkable. It is a distributed research project, conducted by people who have nothing in common except their love of a specific television show and their willingness to look at it more carefully than it was ever strictly necessary to look. The discoveries they have made and shared have created a collective knowledge about Family Guy that exceeds what any individual viewer could access, a collaborative knowledge-building enterprise ongoing for more than 2 decades that has made the show meaningfully richer for everyone who benefits from its output. The specific pleasures of this discovery community are worth naming. There is the pleasure of finding something yourself, the private experience of recognition when you notice something nobody told you to look for. There is the pleasure of sharing a discovery, of introducing someone else to something you found and watching their reaction. There is the pleasure of building on what others have found, of taking a discovery someone else made and using it as the starting point for a deeper investigation. And there is the particular pleasure of sitting with something that cannot be fully explained, a detail whose meaning is ambiguous or whose origin is uncertain, that represents not a solved puzzle but an ongoing conversation. Family Guy has been having this conversation for over 25 years. The conversation has involved hundreds of writers, dozens of directors, multiple animation studios, composers, sound designers, voice actors, and the accumulated attention of millions of people who found something in this show worth watching closely. Every Easter egg in the show's history is a node in this conversation, a point where the creators communicated with the audience through the specific language of hidden content, trusting that the right people would find the message. The Griffin family lives at 31 Spooner Street, in a town that does not exist, in a Rhode Island that is adjacent to but not quite the same as the real one. Their house is impossible in its architecture and perfectly itself in its emotional geography. The things hidden within it are a record of the people who made it and the love and craft and private humor they brought to its construction. Every episode contains something you have not found yet. That is a promise that Family Guy has kept, quietly and without announcement, for every single one of its 25 years. Whatever time it is where you are right now, whatever the outside world is doing beyond the screen you are watching this on, I hope this has been exactly what it was supposed to be. A quiet, detailed, unhurried walk through a world full of hidden things. Thank you for spending this time here. Sleep well wherever you are. If this video gave you something to go back and look for in an old episode, please leave a comment below and tell me what it was. I genuinely read every single one. And if you have not yet subscribed, one tap of that button costs nothing and means you will be here for every journey we take into these hidden worlds. The next one is already waiting, and it is full of things you have not found yet. End of script. Bonus section. The Pawtucket Patriot Ale Universe beer cans, golden tickets, and the brewery's hidden world. The Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, where Peter Griffin works for a substantial portion of the show's run, is one of the most thoroughly detailed fictional workplaces in animated television history, and its visual world contains a remarkable density of hidden details that most viewers absorb without consciously registering. The brewery itself is modeled on real New England industrial architecture from the early to mid-20th century, and the specific elements visible in its interior, the vats and pipes and catwalks and bottling lines, correspond to real equipment used in actual craft brewing operations. Someone on the production team either visited a real brewery or researched the equipment thoroughly enough to render it with genuine specificity. The Pawtucket Patriot Ale can itself, which appears in background shots throughout the show in every context imaginable, has undergone subtle design changes across the show's seasons that track with real changes in craft beer packaging aesthetics during the same period. The can visible in early seasons has the design sensibility of late 1990s regional beer packaging. By the middle seasons, its design has quietly modernized without any narrative acknowledgement of the change, becoming slightly more consistent with what craft brewery packaging actually looked like in the era when those episodes were produced. It is a piece of ongoing background authenticity that nobody asked for and that nobody in the writing room needed to provide, but that somebody apparently cared enough to maintain. The Golden Ticket episode from Season 4, titled Deep Throats in its production history but released differently, creates an explicit homage to the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory film, and through it to the Roald Dahl novel. Within this homage are specific details about the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery's internal architecture that only become visible in scenes that use the Willy Wonka frame as a vehicle for depicting the brewery in an unusual way. The Wonka-style factory revealed within the Pawtucket Patriot premises contains elements that are consistent with what has been shown of the brewery in other episodes, suggesting that the writers treated the brewery as a real location with a coherent internal geography rather than simply as a backdrop that could be redesigned for each episode's needs. The bottle caps that appear in various episodes involving the brewery contain small text that has been read by fans with freeze frame tools. Some of this text is production relevant, containing episode codes and production dates in formats that appear to have been copied from the actual physical media used by the animation team. Other text is humorous or self-referential in ways consistent with the show's general tendency to hide jokes and readable background details. And some of the text in a small number of episodes from the later seasons contains content that corresponds to real-world dates and events, creating a hidden timeline of when specific scenes were animated that is completely inaccessible to casual viewers, but available to anyone willing to read bottle-cap text on a paused streaming service. Peter's relationship with the brewery as his employer changes significantly across the show's run, and these changes are documented in small visual details that do not require close attention to notice, but that reward it when you look. In his early seasons working at the brewery, Peter's workspace, visible in episodes set there, reflects a certain level of institutional engagement. There are personal items on his workstation. There are signs of effort toward the minimum requirements of the job. By the later seasons, the visible details of his workspace have changed in ways that suggest a different relationship to the employment, one that is more nominal than actual. These changes are never commented on. They simply exist as a visual record of a character's evolving relationship to a major part of his life. Bonus Section 2. The Road to Episodes. A genre within a genre. The Road to Episodes deserve their own extended analysis as a distinct subgenre within Family Guy, one that operates by a different set of creative rules than the standard episodes, and that contains its own ecosystem of hidden details and Easter eggs. These episodes, which send Brian and Stewie on adventure journeys together, are in some respects the show's most carefully crafted content, built on a foundation of genuine affection for the Hope and Crosby Road to films they reference. Road to Rhode Island, the first of these episodes from Season 2, established the template. Brian and Stewie travel from San Diego back to their home, navigating a series of adventures with the easy but complicated chemistry of mismatched companions who have chosen each other rather than been assigned to each other. The episode contains several pieces of hidden content that reward rewatching. The specific route that Brian and Stewie take across the country does not quite correspond to the most logical path between San Diego and Rhode Island, and the geographical deviations are not accidental. The places they stop and the environments they pass through correspond to specific real-world locations that have significance in MacFarlane's own biography and travel history. The episode is partly a road trip across America and partly a road trip across specific memories. Road to Europe from Season 3 sends the duo to England and Germany, and the European settings are rendered with a specificity that required genuine research into locations the show's art team may or may not have visited directly. The British television programming that features in this episode, specifically the Jolly Farm Review, which Stewie becomes obsessed with, parodies a real tradition of British children's programming with enough precision to suggest that the writers had studied examples of it. The specific elements of British children's television aesthetics present in the fictional program correspond to real conventions of the genre, rather than to a generic idea of what British children's programming might look like. Road to Rupert in Season 5, which involved a simpler domestic quest for Stewie's beloved teddy bear, contains hidden details in its physical comedy sequences that require close attention to fully appreciate. When Brian and Stewie navigate various obstacles during their journey, the specific ways their bodies interact with the environment around them are animated with an unusual attention to physical consequence. Objects they move have weight. Surfaces they land on respond appropriately to impact. The usual cartoon immunity to consequence is slightly suspended in these sequences in favor of something closer to physical plausibility, creating comedy that works both as slapstick and as genuine physical performance. The animation of these sequences required considerably more frame-by-frame work than standard comedy scenes, and the care invested is visible to anyone paying attention to how the characters move. Road to Germany from Season 7, in which Stewie's time machine takes him and Brian to Nazi Germany, is the most historically specific of all the Road to episodes and contains the most consequential hidden details. The period rendering of 1930s Germany is thorough enough that it documents real elements of the historical period in background details, crowd compositions, and architectural features that required genuine research. Within this historical rendering are small elements that are anachronistic, not as errors but as deliberate comedy placements, contemporary visual elements dropped into a historical setting in ways that create brief, quiet jokes for viewers paying enough attention to notice the discontinuity. Road to the North Pole from Season 9, a Christmas special, is one of the most emotionally complex Road to episodes and contains within its extended runtime some of the show's most carefully constructed hidden emotional content. The specific ways in which this episode plays with the mythology of Santa Claus and the industrial logistics of gift delivery connect to a long tradition of satirical children's entertainment that takes the mechanics of holiday mythology seriously enough to find genuine comedy in them. Embedded within the episode's more overtly dark sequences are small visual details that reference earlier Christmas episodes from the show's history, creating a private Christmas carol for the show's most attentive long-term viewers. Road to Vegas from Season 11, in which Brian and Stewie encounter alternate versions of themselves via teleportation malfunction, is the most philosophically layered Road to episode and the one that makes the most explicit use of the show's capacity for hidden meaning. The alternate universe versions of Brian and Stewie are rendered with specific differences from the main timeline versions that go beyond the simple successful versus unsuccessful dynamic the episode uses as its comedic engine. The alternate Stewie and Brian have made choices, visible in their body language and specific behaviors, that distinguish them from their counterparts in ways that repay close attention. The episode is asking, quietly, what makes a person who they are, and whether the circumstances of their life are more or less responsible for that identity than the choices they make within those circumstances. These are heavy questions for a Road to Vegas episode, and most viewers experience the comedy of the premise without accessing the philosophical layer beneath it. But it is there, embedded in the specific choices made about how these alternate characters present themselves. Bonus Section 3. The Simpsons crossover in detail. The Family Guy and Simpsons crossover episode, The Simpsons Guy from Season 13, deserves its own extended treatment because it contains more hidden details per minute than any other single episode in the show's run. This is the most formally ambitious episode Family Guy ever produced, and its ambition shows up not only in the scope of its storytelling but in the density of its embedded content. The episode begins with the Griffin family on the road, fleeing controversy, and ends up in Springfield through a series of plot contrivances that the episode handles with affectionate self-awareness. The specific Springfield locations that the Griffins visit during their time there are rendered with enough fidelity to The Simpsons' established visual world that viewers who know that show well would recognize them immediately, while also being slightly modified in ways that acknowledge the perspective of visitors from another show's visual universe experiencing a different show's world. The Peter and Homer relationship, which forms the episode's emotional core, contains hidden content in the specific ways their interactions play out. They get along. They are immediately compatible in a way that is both funny and touching. Two characters from different shows who share enough DNA that their friendship feels natural, but their compatibility also contains specific differences that the episode marks carefully. Homer is a character from a show with a different relationship to consequence than Family Guy. Peter is a character from a show with a different approach to internal character consistency. These differences surface in small ways in their interactions, visible if you know both shows well enough to read their respective characters' behavioral codes. The steamed hams joke from The Simpsons, one of the most beloved pieces of Simpsons comedy, is referenced in the crossover in a way that is specifically calibrated for the Simpsons audience rather than the Family Guy audience. The joke assumes knowledge of a particular moment in The Simpsons' history that Family Guy's main audience might not have. Finding it in the crossover episode as a background gag rather than a foregrounded reference is a choice that priorities the depth of the joke's connection to Simpsons lore over its accessibility to people who did not already know it. The fight between Peter and Homer, which parodies the chicken fight format while simultaneously being a commentary on the competitive relationship between the two shows, contains specific beats that reference both shows' histories rather than simply being a generic action sequence. Specific moments in the fight staging call back to specific moments in previous chicken fights. Homer's use of Emmy Awards as projectiles has already been discussed as a scorekeeping gesture, but the specific way he wields them, the physical performance of their deployment, is also a parody of moments from The Simpsons when Homer's physical comedy escalates beyond its normal parameters. The episode is fighting on two fronts simultaneously, as a piece of Family Guy content and as a piece of Simpsons parody, and the hidden detail work serves both dimensions equally. Bonus Section 4. What the Drunken Clam Knows. The Drunken Clam is not just a location, it is a social ecosystem, and across the show's 20-plus seasons, it has developed a visual history that is richer than any other single gathering place in the show. The bar functions as the neutral ground where the social bonds between Peter, Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland are maintained and tested, and the physical environment of the bar documents this function in its accumulated details. The specific beer taps visible behind the bar at the Drunken Clam change across seasons. In the earliest episodes, the tap handles are generic. By the middle seasons, they have been individualized, and fans who have studied high-resolution screenshots of Drunken Clam scenes have identified several tap handles that correspond to real craft breweries in the New England area. This is the same kind of regional specificity embedded in the Providence Street backgrounds. The art department quietly populating the show's world with details sourced from the real-world geography that the fictional setting draws from. The television above the Drunken Clam bar is visible in the background of numerous scenes, and what it is showing in various episodes has been cataloged by fans as a hidden record of what was playing in the real world at the approximate time of each episode's production. Sometimes the television's content is plot relevant, but in many scenes where the bar television is visible as a background element, it is showing content that corresponds to real programming from the production period, creating a hidden historical document of American television embedded in the background of a fictional bar. The specific seating arrangement that Peter, Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland occupy at the Drunken Clam has been analyzed for what it says about their social dynamics. They consistently sit in the same positions relative to each other, Peter at the center, with Joe and Quagmire on either side, and Cleveland in the outer position on his side. This arrangement places Peter at the social center of the group, which is consistent with his narrative centrality in the show. But it also places him in a position of maximum social visibility, facing outward from the bar rather than inward toward it, which says something about his relationship to the space. Peter comes to the Drunken Clam to be seen as much as to drink. His position at the table encodes this without any character ever commenting on it. The Drunken Clam's exterior has changed subtly across the show's run. The signage visible from the street in establishing shots has been updated at least 3 times, with changes in font and color and layout that track with real changes in bar signage aesthetics during the period. The building itself has been rendered with varying degrees of specificity, more detailed in episodes that spend substantial time in its exterior vicinity and less detailed in episodes that use it only for brief establishing purposes. But certain elements of the exterior, the specific shape of the windows, the placement of the entrance, the character of the neighborhood around it, have remained consistent enough to constitute a genuine location within the show's world rather than simply a recurring backdrop. Final extended meditation. Why hidden things matter. There is a specific reason why people seek out Easter eggs in long-running television shows, and it is different from the reason why people seek out Easter eggs in films or video games. In those forms, an Easter egg is typically a fixed thing hidden in a fixed place, a reward for thorough exploration of a bounded space. But in a television show that has been running for 25 years and produced hundreds of episodes, an Easter egg is something different. It is a point of connection across time, a moment when something created years ago speaks to something you notice now, and the discovery creates a brief experience of the show's whole long history becoming present simultaneously. When you find the real sheet music for the Family Guy theme written above Lois's piano in the opening credits, you are not just discovering a visual joke. You are discovering that the show has always been watching you watch it, has always been responding to the kind of attention you were giving it. And when you find that this detail has been there since the very first episode, you realize that the response was there before the attention, that it was left for you to discover whenever you were ready to look. This is what Family Guy has done with its hidden details. It has built a world that rewards years of patient, affectionate looking. Not because the rewards are necessarily profound, not because a hidden joke in a background newspaper is going to change anyone's life, but because the accumulation of these small discoveries creates a specific feeling, the feeling of being seen by the thing you love, of having your attention recognized and reciprocated. For a show about a family that often struggles to see each other clearly, about a father who fails to notice his children, about a wife who is doing the hard work of being present in a family that does not always make space for her, about a baby who is brilliantly articulate and completely unheard by almost everyone around him, the existence of these hidden details is quietly significant. The show that depicts invisibility so extensively has also, all along, been hiding things specifically for the people willing to look. The house at 31 Spooner Street has more rooms than it should have. Its kitchen has carpet where there should be tile. Its living room changes color between seasons. Its mailbox post has a line from a song inscribed on it in text too small to read without a pause button and a good screen. Its opening credits show sheet music that is also the theme you are hearing. Its background characters have names and histories that nobody has ever announced. Its chicken fights happen in a consistent geography that tracks across 20 years of production. Its composers left their names in the credits of fictional adult films. Its creator's near-death experience became a cutaway gag. All of this is still there, in every episode, waiting. The show will keep making new episodes. The fans will keep finding new things. The conversation will continue, carried forward by the specific and beautiful human impulse to look closely at the things you love and to share what you find there. Family Guy is, among other things, a show about people who are often not paying attention to each other, and it has built its most affectionate relationship with its audience specifically through the act of rewarding close attention. That is the final hidden detail. It has been hiding in plain sight since the 31st of January 1999. Thank you for watching. Leave a comment. Subscribe if you want to be here next time. Sleep well. Appendix. The details still waiting to be found. There are Easter eggs in Family Guy that nobody has found yet. This is not speculation. It is an almost mathematical certainty, given the volume of content the show has produced and the density of detail work documented in what has already been discovered. For every hidden text element that has been captured in a screenshot and shared on a forum, for every musical quotation that has been isolated and identified, for every background cameo that has been named, there are others that have not yet surfaced. Some of these undiscovered details are in episodes that have received relatively little close attention because their surface content did not generate enough interest to motivate deep looking. Some are in seasons that the fan community has largely moved past, episodes from periods of the show's run that are not rewatched with the same frequency as the beloved early seasons or the dramatically eventful middle seasons. Some may require technical tools that do not yet exist in their current form to discover, audio processing software or image analysis capabilities that will become available at some point and will make currently invisible content visible. The experience of knowing that undiscovered things exist is itself one of the pleasures of engaging with a long-running show's hidden detail ecosystem. It means that every rewatch carries the possibility of something new. It means that the territory is not exhausted. It means that the conversation the show has been having with its most attentive viewers is not finished, has not reached its last word, is still producing content even when the most dedicated members of the Discovery community believe they have covered the ground thoroughly. This is the gift that a long-running television show can give its audience that almost no other art form can match, the gift of inexhaustibility. Family Guy has been making new episodes, hiding new things, and maintaining its relationship with the tiny percentage of its audience willing to look closely for over a quarter century. And there is no sign that this particular tradition is coming to an end. The next time you sit down with an episode, familiar or new, early season or recent one, watch the background, read the text, listen to what the music is doing underneath the dialogue. Notice who is standing in the back of the crowd. Check what is written on the labels and the signs and the newspaper headlines. Look at the walls and the shelves and the sky and the floors. Be the kind of viewer who is rewarded. The show will meet you there.